was on a call for like 6 hours, and it was like one time.
Star Force or
Good evening.
Space Force.
Welcome to Township Board of Trustees meeting for Thursday, November 8th. And seeing that Sunday is Veterans Day, I'd like to ask one of our board members who served in the Army during the Vietnam War, Trustee Massey, would you lead us in the pledge?
Yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With that, would there be a motion for approval of the agenda and the consent agenda?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we're going to move to public hearing for the Community Development Block Grant, or the acronym CDBG funds. And it's a 3-year grant that we received about $190,000 over a 3-year period. And we're required to have a public hearing where we open the meeting to anybody in the public that would have any suggestions as to how these funds should be spent or have any ideas on how they could be spent. And so with that, I want to open the public hearing and ask if there's anybody here in the public that would like to speak specifically regarding these CDBG funds and how they could be used in our community. Anybody have any comments? Mr. Ert?
Yes, Senator 7212 Border Road. Wasn't really going to get into this, but what I noticed is this is mostly for the senior center. The senior center is a joint venture between the city and the township. I hope they're contributing the same amount.
Any other comments before we bring it back to the board and any staff? Any other public comment? Seeing, yeah, with regard to the CDBG funds? No. Okay, we're going to have public comment, just open the public comment regarding township issues in just a moment. With that, we're going to bring it back up here to the board in just a moment. I just want to see if there's any other public comment with regard to CDBG funds. And seeing no other, we will close that portion of the public hearing and ask to bring it up to the board here and see if the board has any input on suggestions. Ms. Lane?
Well, I have a long list, having been here prior. And the idea of listing all of these, you don't have to list them with an amount, but we list them so that when we have the money, we can then assign it to these. So, gentlemen, I'm going to read off my list just so for that purpose.
And just, Ms. Lane, if I can just clarify that what happens is that we like to have a long list of items, because if one of those items is not allowed, then if we don't have others on the list, then we just lose out on being able to use that money. So,
right, go somewhere else.
So we create a long list, and hopefully some of them are approved.
Right. My first thing is, of course, the McFarland Library. Previously, we've done some handicap upgrades over there with a ramp, but being there recently, I think there are handicap upgrades needed in the bathrooms, and there's also a side entrance that is still steps, and we recently had an inspection performed over there, and if the contractors came up with anything else that qualifies for improvements under CDBG grant, I'd like those taken care of. Secondly, the demolition of any structures that would qualify under blight removal. One of the other areas is smoke and carbon monoxide detectors for low and moderate income areas that can be installed once we have a number of them that our fire department could install. Special assessment districts for people who have special needs. We don't have to determine their income, that's done at the county, but we had 6 families in the county that were able to have their whole road assessment paid for because that they met the federal guidelines. I'm also including historical preservation where necessary, home rehabilitation improvements for low-income areas, and bus stops with benches and covers like we have here at the police department. People that are using mass transit sometimes are standing in all kinds of weather, don't have benches to sit on or any kind of, so those are my list, and I'll be glad to take any and all others.
Yeah, and there are certain qualifications, I know, and I appreciate your list, Ms. Lane. We've tried for library money in the past and were denied because we couldn't show that the income level of primary users would fit the federal guidelines.
All of the handicap, not to be argumentative, no, back in 2009 through 12, we did the handicap ramp and
Right.
the doors
Yep.
from CDBG monies.
Right.
And we did a handicap fountain in the library, but I
I'm
think
not sure if
now
the
it's,
guidelines changed, but we
right, well,
we
that's
pretty
what-
much were mimicking that and got turned down.
Okay.
But I'm not opposed to putting it on the list again. We'll try it again.
Right, yeah. as
Mr.
long-
Buzak?
Yeah, that was my only comment. She hit a lot of the stuff I was gonna talk about. And we do have more time to add to the list, right? This is just the first hearing,
No.
correct?
We have to have the list into the county by November 21st.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well,
other
we-
people have suggestions we can add it
Right, we
to
can still
outside
add
of
it
this meeting.
outside
but-
this meeting up till November 21st.
Correct.
Right. Because I agree, we wanted to have as much as we possibly can on this list, and even if we don't think it qualifies, it's good to be there, because they change the rules year to year, and all of a sudden it might work, and so why not have it there available if,
Right.
you know, so we don't lose the money.
right.
So, Mr. Mansour? Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Massey?
who has knowledge of the real types of the real types of things that may be acceptable?
So really, when you think about community development block grants and what they really try to target from the county's level is low to moderate income areas that meet federal guidelines. We only have a very small neighborhood within Grand Blanc Township proper that falls within those guidelines. It's very limited. In fact, with the last CDBG funding, Director Sears had proposed hooking up water lines, and we hooked up several over there during this last run. In fact, a lot of them were completed this year as part of the prior three-year program. So a lot of it is targeted, like if you can get it there, that's where you see like the installation of street lights in that area. It's been highlighted. That's an area that we know is probably gonna get funded. But there's other things like blight. One of the problems, like when you think of blighted structures, if we wanna turn in and say we want $100,000 for blighted residential structures, they want us to identify what those structures are. They want specifics about what we're doing, because before they would grant us just carte blanche for $100,000. They want to know, in fact, Director Sears earlier this week reached out because we were talking about, we have $100,000 that hasn't been earmarked yet. We talked about some of the blighted commercial structures on South Saginaw, up in the corner of South Saginaw and Maple. There's a couple of here between here and and Hill that probably would be excellent candidates potentially, but they're going to come back and ask you, does the township own them? Are you going to use the money to purchase those and then demolish the structures? And $100,000 wouldn't go very far if we were trying to purchase it at market value and tear it down, but we could potentially work with the owners of those structures if they're willing to allow CDBG to place basically a lien on the property that we're gonna tear it down, and whatever it goes over that, somebody's responsible, whether it's the owner or the township, or we work something out. So there's some challenges. CDBG is absolutely a challenging program to work with, but it's a great program. We hate to not use every
Take
dollar
advantage.
that is available.
Mr. Buzak?
Yeah, just, you brought up a good point. Can we add the water hookups? Because not everybody hooked up in that particular subdivisions. Can we add that back in?
Yeah.
Just in case somebody does, and then can we do something for the sump pumps? Because remember, there was a lot of sump pumps, and that way, it helps the water.
Yeah, we can probably have Mr. Sears comment on it, but the sump pump program, from what I'm familiar with, is extremely expensive. So the number that you're going to be able to benefit from
Right,
is
I'm just adding
a
things
few.
on there. I understand that because we went through that grant program for sump pumps.
And
But we
the-
helped a lot of people in a lot of
Yeah.
different areas, but I'm just adding things to the list just as an extra
Right.
precaution, so if we can use it.
I didn't add the water connection this year because the program was extremely difficult to manage when we did it last year. We only had one contractor bid on it. The contractor was also working in Flint. They weren't real responsive to us, and they were slow. The residents weren't very happy with the work they did. So, with the current condition in Flint, they're still working on everything. I don't see getting more bids for that work, especially with all the restrictions with Community Development Block Grant. To do any kind of construction project, you have to use prevailing wage. You have to go through the gamut on having minority-owned businesses and everything else. There's a lot of restrictions on contractors. It's not just advertising in a local paper. Not everybody qualifies. So
Right.
it was just really difficult last year. We only connected 6 homes with, I think it was $67,000. So I didn't see it worth my time personally to go through that project again.
Well, can't we at least add it so we could put the bids out, and if the bids was only one guy again, we could say, no, we're not gonna do it, right?
We could do that.
Just
And-
as a safety
but
gap. because-
personally, when I talk to Dennis about it, I would rather put projects in there that we're gonna follow through with. So, because if we're awarded that money for that grant, and then we don't do the project, we're just gonna lose the money. I would rather have projects that we're actually gonna follow through with and use the money rather than lose it.
Well, I thought we were gonna follow through with it, but that's where I
I'm
thought-
just nervous that it won't work out
But
if
we're
we get
adding a
into
lot
it.
of other things on there. I mean,
I
don't know.
understand.
If you're prioritizing them, I can see what you're saying. This
I
could be down the
understand.
list, but
If we put it on the list, it will get awarded though.
And then you just remember that once it's awarded, they won't award everything. We can turn in $300,000 worth of requests.
Right.
They're gonna award $190,000
right,
worth.
I understand.
The other ones that are on the list, I mean, they're just off the list. I mean, we
Right.
can, what you could put in is, we could ask for, $150,000 worth of water hookups, and they might only give you 50,000 for it, for example.
Right.
But that's the challenge. If we put it on and it gets awarded, then we do need to move it forward.
Well, yeah,
If
I
the
would
board
think so.
wishes, I
Right.
can absolutely add that project to the list. There's just a chance that we're not gonna get good pricing on it like last time. And I just feel like it wasn't a project worthy of the CDBG funds.
Well,
That we
and
could find better ways to spend
I
the
think
money.
one of the things we gotta look at is, the most good for the most people too in our township. And if we're able to get some blighted buildings removed as opposed to getting a handful of houses on water and they aren't thrilled
that's
with the
fine.
idea of it, but.
I was just bringing it up because I wanted to
Sure.
make
Yeah,
sure
no, I'm
if we
glad
ran
you
out of money, we'd have
Sure.
a project that will help people.
Absolutely.
Instead of giving it back to another community. I mean,
Yeah,
they can use it, but we'd like to use it in our community.
Our goal is absolutely not to give it back to the
Right.
community.
So do you think
100%.
it's not best to put it on, I'm just bringing the question up.
Well, I think you
County.
clarified something too, Earl, is that, the money can't be moved around.
Right.
I mean, once if they approve it, then it has to be used for that.
It has to be used for those specific projects. It has to be used for the list of projects that they approved. It can be reprogrammed to projects that they approved and we're currently constructing, but you can't add projects to the contracts once they've approved it.
Right. Mr. Thomas had his hand up and then Ms. Lane.
Through you, Mr. Supervisor, to Superintendent Limita. At the new pavilion at Creasy Park, we have a ADA compliant playscape. And at the old pavilion, there's the playscape that we were talking about with the new flooring matting. And being that that would be an ADA compliancy, could we turn something in for that?
The best way to answer that question is, yeah, we can turn something in for it. Generally, what we try to do as we're putting the list together is we'll just call the person in charge from the county and we'll say, hey, what about this project? Do you think this is gonna fly? And we can certainly inquire about it, because they're gonna look at a priority list too of what we turn in. Usually, like the senior center operations, we've had great experience with having those projects approved. They really look, and kind of what Supervisor Bennett just said, the greater good for the greatest number of people. When they're looking at the projects that they're gonna fund, it's kind of one of the things that they're looking for is, does this impact? And it clearly, I mean, low to moderate income people that look to see what kind of impact we can have for those. So we could make that argument with the playground that it does get used, but it's certainly not targeted just to low to moderate income. It is for everybody.
So the
Would-
street,
Oh, I'm sorry. With the project with the senior center, the $180,000 to add on to resident Ertz quandary is, if we put the $180,000 into half of the senior center, what kind of project was that?
What we've done in the past, you mean?
No, what are we asking for now?
Well, this time, there's always some that goes towards the to the director's salary.
Okay.
This one has sidewalk replacement, the roof overhang replacement, and LED lighting upgrade.
Now, would we expect the city to match that? I don't,
This has nothing to do with the city. We're not in a
Right.
comparison. They get an award for their CDBG, and then they
Right.
allocate theirs. They might have more low, moderate income areas that they target their funds for. Although they've also always done CDBG projects through the
so
senior
this would
center as
just
well.
be for a betterment of the senior center gratis type?
Yeah, it's grant funds, or community development block grant funds,
Okay.
so it's not costing us anything, it's just a matter of what we can do. I mean, they had a pretty bad parking lot over there, we looked at that last time and put that in, it was rejected just because they wouldn't go for the parking lot itself, but they would fix the handicap curbing that was an issue in the front. So you just have to be very careful about the projects that you just gotta work with them to come up with the projects that they will fund.
So would it be okay if we brainstormed on this, emailed you and the supervisor, and then send us out a list of what you think the priorities should be?
Yeah, and like I said, what we'll do with it is we'll call and ask, like, okay, hey, we've got some other ideas for you. Much like we did with the blighted commercial structures this week, we call and say, what do you think our chances are of getting funding to get rid of blighted commercial structures along the Saginaw Street corridor? And, the answer comes back, it's always equivocal, but it's gonna be, well, let me ask you these questions. Do you own it? Are you gonna buy it? What are you gonna do with the money? Are you gonna buy it and then try to tear it down? Well, if I try to buy Saginaw Street property and tear it down for $100,000,
It's not gonna happen.
it's just not gonna happen. So then we back away from that project and we can go to the senior center and say, well, hey, how about, can we do, whatever project you come up with? What about a playscape flooring that's ADA compliant? Would you guys, and they'll be honest with us, like, yeah, that sounds like something we can fund. So before we put our final list together that goes in on the 21st, we'll have kind of vetted each one of the projects.
Would you prefer us to send it to you directly or through Supervisor Bennett, then to you?
Either way, I mean, Supervisor Bennett's the one that's basically in charge of the CDBG, and he works with, Megan Gilman does a tremendous amount of work on it. So if you just send it to Scott or I, copy Megan, and we'll build the list, and then we'll kind of vet it through, and then you guys can take a look at the list before we submit it on the 21st.
Mr. Guzak, or
Go ahead.
Mr. Atkins?
Are the funds available if we own a property and it's blighted?
Yeah, you actually, if we own property and we want to remove it, that and again with like land bank properties, they will do land bank properties.
They will do land bank properties?
Yes.
They will do land
absolute-
bank properties. The only thing they'll caution you on is when you use CDBG funds to do demo, then they absolutely do the environmental assessment, has to be done, and they do a complete, like, it might cost you, say you tear down a house and it costs you $11,000 to get it down because you hire somebody to come and tear it down. If you do it with CDBG funds, it might cost you $27,000 to tear the same house down because of the remediation that they're required to do when you're using federal funds.
Have we considered this for the Playland property?
I did vet Playland through them, and they weren't real excited about it.
Well, not real excited, or did they say no?
They didn't say no, but they gave me a strong indication that it would not be approved. It doesn't mean we can't put it in the application and see what happens with it.
Did they say like why, like
They
didn't
just
have a
said they
good
didn't
feeling
think the
about it?
property would qualify because they didn't think in the area it was in, it wouldn't benefit low to moderate area residents. Whereas in the past where we've done demolitions was in the low to moderate income neighborhoods.
Okay.
And those were a slam dunk because it benefited directly that neighborhood that was pre-qualified. But they said because it wasn't in that area, it probably wouldn't get approved. But once again, that doesn't mean we can't put it in the application and see what happens.
How about sidewalk along the presidential streets?
We could do sidewalk. The problem is there's not enough right of way, and I'd have to acquire easements for all of that, which could be costly. And that was brought up quite a few times in there. There are no sidewalks, but because there's open ditches and the right of ways are kind of small,
But what about along Fenton Road?
we could do Fenton Road, but again, getting the biggest bang for our buck, I don't think we could put in very much sidewalk because of the Fenton Road frontage. That's gonna be expensive construction costs,
Because of utilities and what have you.
utilities and everything else. And
Mr. Guzzo?
getting it by the road commission also.
Right, okay. Mr. Guzzo?
Yeah, the question I had is, I know we're allocated like 190,000, but we've only got 90 down, and of course, we don't wanna, we wanna exceed 190, because one time we had a lot of stuff rejected or whatever. So we're gonna try to have at least, what, 250 or something in here approximately by the time we're done?
Absolutely. The list that you have are projects that we were able to come up with in a very short amount of
Right.
time that we
Right.
got. We didn't get the notification until like 2 weeks ago, I think it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not a whole lot of time to come up with
Right.
the projects that qualify in the very narrow window they give us. So our goal is to definitely get as many projects on that list as we can.
Right, yeah, I hope we're
'cause
way over the 190.
We absolutely want to use all of that money.
So if anybody has any suggestions, email Dennis or I or Megan or all three of us, and we will run them by the folks down at the county and see what their suggestion is.
Absolutely.
But we want to make sure we take full advantage of of the 190. Ms. Lane?
I just want to remind anybody, if you're still thinking of things, because the minutes of the meeting, it has to be included in the minutes of the meeting too, for us to go back and qualify if all of a sudden we have extra money or somebody can't use their money. If we've got a project mentioned in the minutes that they're willing to let us spend the money on, we can do that. But it has to be in the minutes in order to qualify at this public hearing.
Well, how are we gonna do that?
I'm just saying, that's why I'm saying, if you have any thoughts, say it now.
Well, we could always convene a meeting with four of us
Okay.
in a few days
We're gonna have to,
and approve a list too.
because we're way short.
What's the,
Yeah, Mr. Thomas?
Supervisor Bennett, what is our cutoff day that you want us to send everything to you? The
Well,
15th?
our deadline is, what did we say, Dennis? The
21st.
So
So
15th,
probably
14th?
the,
You and I are gonna be out of town.
probably by the 16th, I would guess. Friday, the 16th.
It gives us enough time to at least try to vet it with them before we submit the list.
And then we would call, I'm sorry,
We'll call the county
and then we'll
run it by
call a
them.
special board meeting, so it's in these minutes?
If there's anything new that we haven't had already.
I mean, right now, we've talked, about potentials for handicap upgrades with the library, demo of blighted structures, both residential and commercial, smoke detectors, special assessment district, income qualified repayments, historic preservation, home rehab, bus stop, mass transit benches and/or covers, water hookups, sidewalks, playland, commercial rehab. This is a good time to get them out there, so I'll write down everything you guys say
Can we
too.
throw in the kitchen for the South Pavilion? Oh, I don't wanna bring up Perry House, but the new kitchen and the restroom rehabilitation of the South Pavilion at Creasy.
We can probably put something in there that more broad-based covers, parks and recreation or ADA
What about
compliant.
programming, Dennis, for, or Mr. Lehman, for parks? Have we ever tried to get any money for programming for maybe, I don't know, if we have any kind of program for families that are income qualifying? Pay for
Scholarships.
registration fees or anything along those lines, Ms. Hudson?
Well, as Mr. Lehman had mentioned, we've always done the senior coordinator's salary, and the
Okay.
city does that as well. We haven't really done a lot with special needs programming. I don't know how
I
far
mean,
they
just
would.
income level in terms of, that we would provide with these funds, because obviously they're for
What we've,
moderate to lower income.
what we've run into with that is that we initially probably maybe 15 years ago, started doing some programming for special needs, which was pretty well received. And then the center over on Dort Highway for autism
Right.
has really grown and expanded. And so a lot of the program that we were offering, now they're offering.
Yeah.
And so they're going through that. And what we're doing with them now is offering them assistance with getting facilities in the schools, so like they can run a basketball program, that kind of thing. But we try not to just butt heads
Yeah.
competing with them.
I guess I didn't mean so much special needs as lower income, like.
Like for, like scholarships?
Like
is what you're saying?
scholarship for
I-
paying
I don't think they'll
for
do that.
registrations or
We've never applied for it, but I've never been under the impression that would qualify.
We
think-
could always ask them, but.
I think a big part of it, again, they identify your community, and like, when you go in and talk to them, they got your map of your community, and they're like, here, you know, when you
Here's
look
the
at
area.
overall, like Genesee County, then you look at Grand Blanc Township, we probably have the least amount that meets federal, threshold guidelines, that it's, we work harder just to spend it. I mean, it's great that they give us $190,000, and that sounds so good, but man, it's hard. Like, you can see we're struggling. Like, what do we got to do to come up with something that's viable to spend? I mean, back during Mickey's tenure, they actually approved, you know, quite a few ADA compliant projects out at the Perry Homestead, and some things like that, to the point where then they said, no, we're not going to fund anymore out there. Don't put that on the
Right.
list any longer. So that's also, you get like fatigued. Like they're just, we're not going to spend any, we're not going to give you any more approved grant money for the Perry Homestead. But it doesn't mean like we can't, like I think McFarland Library, is a good suggestion, is to look back at it again and say, hey, we got some opportunities here.
Now, I know they've got, the neighborhoods mapped out, but do they update that annually, or have we seen any changes in that?
It hasn't changed. It's the exact same
Gotcha.
one it's been.
Is it up to us to get them to update it, or do they do it?
Oh, no, they do it automatic. They tell you which areas
Okay.
are low and moderate income.
Ms. Lane?
The 6 families that were awarded full payment for the road assessment don't even come to us. They go down to the county. Maybe 20 people while I was here went down and had to lay out privately with the county what their finances were, and surprisingly, those people were not in the area that you are thinking is the low-income area. These were special assessments throughout the township, and 6 people benefited, and that was to the tune that time of maybe $30,000. So it helped out 6 families, and
Right, we'll put it on the list.
Well, it's on there.
Mr.
already.
it is
Answer.
on
Mr. Lehman, is there anywhere along Maple Road that also qualifies for that?
No, this really is, it's a very tight area. I mean, we commonly refer to it as a presidential streets area, and that's really the only thing that's identified. But like Clerk Lane had said, there are individuals throughout the community who can qualify for programs, housing rehab or special assessment repayments. That is income contingent, and we can create some kind of programs that are income contingent. Again, they just have to, the individuals have to fill out the paperwork to show that they qualify to the federal guidelines for low income.
Okay, super. Mr. Atkins and Mr. Thomas?
I was just wondering, how do wages get approved out of this grant? Wages are being paid out of it for the senior center director, correct?
Correct. But because of the population that they serve, it's an approved project by by block grants, because of the population that's being served.
Okay.
That's been quite a few years, right? I mean,
Yeah, forever.
It's been probably forever.
So in this,
Supervisor.
so that amount stays pretty consistent that we asked for?
It has,
Yeah. Mr. Thomas?
What about the bike path, the new bike path trail coming through?
We could put it on the list, but it's not in that particular area, but we could try.
But it's going right through the park, right? Correct? Or going up to the park?
It's down
Or
Perry
rehab.
Road right now.
right, it's from Vassar to.
That trail
Whitetail.
that you were telling me about, Supervisor Bennett,
Oh,
the
the
one
one that we were looking at on, Dort Highway Extension?
Yes.
It's not in a low.
I think that'd be
area.
I think that's a reach. I mean,
Well, we're paying salaries, so let's go for it. I mean,
I don't, it's hard to say that the population that it serves.
Right.
It's not in the neighborhood that right
Clo-
now is
close enough
mapped
to-
out as being
Is that the Heights?
qualifying area.
Is that what you said?
Residential streets, but we refer to it as.
Northwest corner.
So we've got until next Friday to turn our list in to you, and then you're going to hold a special, and then you're going to vet them through the county, and then if our suggestions that we think of aren't on your list currently, we're gonna hold a special board meeting on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Right, Monday probably, and
Do
That
it
would-
Monday.
have a meeting for a few minutes.
And then Clerk Lane, we can post that on Friday if we're gonna have a meeting on Monday. That'll give us enough time to post it. Is that agreeable?
Yeah,
with
I think
everyone?
that's what we'll
That's the
do.
plan.
Okay, I'm in.
Okay. All right, thanks for everyone's suggestions. And, anything else on that, Mr. Lemata?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Moving on, we'll open the floor now for citizen comments, and we'll start here in the front of the room. Good evening, Ms. Knack.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Nag. I live at 3305 East Hill Road.
Can I ask you just to pull the microphone down so that
How's
they can
that?
hear you on TV?
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. I've been to lots of places where you couldn't hear the person talk. Okay, 3305 East Hill Road, Grand Blanc, Michigan. I am here very simply to give everyone an update on the Perry House. We had an open house there on the weekend of homecoming. I believe it was October the 6th. For the first time, we had an experiment and we decided we would try a petting zoo, which was very, very well received by people who came of all ages. And we're going to do that again when we have our open house in the spring. Now, the spring open house is, you know what, I don't have the date for it, but it's the Saturday, I think, before Mother's Day. We try to have two, one tied in with homecoming, one in the spring. Another thing that we had was a hands-on project for people to try out. It was a rope making machine that someone brought in, and they had some trained high school students who knew the history of rope making, and kids went away with big thick jump ropes that they had made themselves. And it's been an experiment for us because we're never really completely sure what it is that people want to do and what they want to see there, but we don't want to keep having the same things over and over and over again. So it looks like these hands-on things are very well appreciated and accepted by the public. The other thing that's still going on out there is Don Simon's archaeological dig. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that in October because it rained all morning long, and although it quit later in the day, it was still too wet for that to occur. One of the other things that we are working on is establishing priorities for the development of the house and the site, and we are, that's been an ongoing process. We also are making plans to acknowledge an Eagle Scout named Jacob Sanborn for making some benches out there that people used during the open house. And I want to thank all of you who were able to attend, and we hope to see you again. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Thomas, then Mr. Atkins.
Go ahead. Mine's probably the same issue.
I was able to get my whole family out there, and the petting zoo was incredible. It was a very good event, and the benches that you're talking about would be a amazing fundraiser vehicle because those benches are just you don't see them anywhere. They were very well built.
The wood was donated by Don Simons from some trees that were taken down, I believe, near his home. And that design you can get online. It's for the Aldo Leopold bench. He was a pioneer conservationist in the United States. And the design he came up with can be, you can use any kind of wood that you have around. We were fortunate to have some really beautiful wood that he could make the benches out of. We did put them under cover because they aren't anchored to the ground, and we really were afraid of the weathering if we left them out, and also somebody could pick them up and take them away. So we have to figure out what we're going to do about that issue, but thank you. We thought they were way beyond what we had anticipated that he was capable of doing. It was a very good project. Anybody else?
You folks are doing an outstanding job, and I'm so proud that you're part of our, and thankful that you're such a intricate part of our township. And I was out there and I was just floored. I just loved the benches. I loved you guys being in the homecoming parade right behind us. That was awesome. Just two quick questions. I know that Director Lloyd has been working hand in hand with your folks and your executive staff.
Yes, it's been very, very helpful.
Could you give us an update on where we are with the historical marker and also where we are with the curriculum with the schools?
You know, I really can't tell you anything at all about the curriculum with the schools at this point. A decision was supposed to have been made yesterday in Lansing with the Michigan Historical Society. I called Mickey Hoffman and Mr. Lloyd, but I have not heard anything back one way or another. But we do have a price for the sign. It's well over $2,000, but the Grand Blanc Heritage Association has agreed to pay half of the cost. So we're waiting to hear definitively that it is a go. Mr. Lloyd was able to find out that the cost also includes having it, I don't know, shipped or brought here so that we don't have to go over there and get it. But we still have to erect it. I think the DPW is. Am I volunteering you? Okay. Is going to put it up for us. Anything else?
No, just thank you for the volunteerism and supporting the community, and just be aware that this board's behind you guys 100%.
And
so don't be shy about asking for anything.
we are very grateful for your support. So thank you.
Ms. Nag. Okay. Further comment from the public? Anybody else? Mr. Erd?
Good evening. Ed Ert, 7212 Porter Road. I just want to make sure that I understand my comments are going to be in regards to Parks and Recs, and they're not directed at the director, okay? They're directed at the issue or the situation, all right? So, on your agenda, you have approval of alcohol in the park, okay? And I just want to make the comment that you have 3 lines listed, okay? A condensed version. On the minutes at the Parks and Recs, there's 8 lines. On their agenda was 10 lines, so there's a lot more going on that's being presented to you as a board to vote on it. I was there at that meeting when they talked about that and got approval for it. It was September 20th. It was in your October 23rd agenda, the minutes of that meeting. At that meeting, the question was asked, is the commission supporting this? Recommending it? That question was avoided. It was never answered. So what they are supporting is a request to this board to allow alcohol in the park. The question was asked, is the Parks and Recreation Commission in support of it? Nope, we're not doing that. We're talking about what's on their agenda, and you don't see what's on their agenda. I was there. Also, I want to move on. There's a lot in their agenda, okay? So I'm just going to move on. In their agenda, it says serving alcohol in the pavilion area. And do the police know what the pavilion area is? It's not say in the pavilion, it says in the area of the pavilion. And that's in the rules and policy. Refreshments will be served in the pavilion's immediate surrounding area. It's in the rules. Refreshments will be served within the pavilion's surrounding area. Does that mean that the playscape that's in the surrounding area, you can have alcohol? Does that mean at the small pavilion, you can have alcohol by the pathway? Does that mean you've got the inline skating right by the north pavilion or south pavilion? Do the police know how they're going to police this? Do we know what the pavilion area is? How far from the pavilion? It doesn't say contained to the pavilion area. It says within the area. So I want you to caution on what you're voting on. Ask yourself, what good is this going to do for the park or the community? All of this, what I talked about, is not included in what you're voting on. It's a condensed version, 3 lines. On the agenda, there was 10 lines that they voted on, and they're not recommending this. It was never talked about recommending it. So I'm going to say this, please, no alcohol in the park. We don't need it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hurt. We always appreciate your comments. Okay, any other public comment? Anybody else have anything? Okay, with that, we'll close public comment and follow the rest of our agenda here. So, next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes, and there was some amendments made to those minutes, so hopefully everybody had a chance to review the changes that were sent out. Mr. Mansour?
So I did review the amendments to the October 23rd, to the October 23rd minutes. Those are fine. But I'm wondering, did we make any changes to the October 11th minutes, which indicated that trustee Adkins was not?
Yes, I made those changes,
Okay.
and that's why I sent out revised minutes to the board.
Okay.
So that rather than try and explain each of them.
Okay.
But just so you're aware, the packet doesn't,
Doesn't
if you
reflect
printed it
that.
off the website, isn't
Yep.
gonna have the updated.
Okay.
You need to print off what was emailed.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I didn't understand trustee Mansour respond to October the 23rd. Did the change meet the request?
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep, thank you.
So is there a motion to
I'll-
approve each individually or as a group?
I'll make a motion to approve the amended minutes for, minutes for October 9th and the amendments for October 11th and 23rd.
Support.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've approved the consent agenda. And moving to future positioning, board will consider any additional fiscal year 2019 proposed budget changes before finalizing the budget on December 13th, 2018 meeting. A revised hard copy with all board approved changes will be provided for the November 27th meeting. And Mr. Limita?
So to recap for the board, the adjustments that we've made to date included an increase in the road funding from the $60,000 we had budgeted to $185,657 to take advantage of the increase in the 50/50 funds. An increase in the McFarland Library contribution from $50,000 to $56,000 contingent upon the city also increasing theirs by $4,000. The campus project fund, instead of allocating automatically the 0.7 of a mil, that we were going to only allocate the amount needed, roughly just under $700,000 to cover the police bond and interest payments, which would free up an additional approximately $229,585 that would be available from revenue. There was a change after we heard the information from Mr. Bucko on the property and liability coverage. Those premiums were down about $11,000 from what we had budgeted, so we're going to incorporate that change. We had a new contract that came in on the school resource officers with Blanc schools that resulted in slightly coming up. It's actually going to come up over the next 3 years. And it's a minor adjustment of a few $1,000s, but we're going to go ahead and make that change based upon the new contract that was executed. I have one question for the board that I just wanted to confirm. We had, if you guys recall, from our 2017 budget presentation by the auditors, Plant Moran, we talked about the $1 million that we had available to bring the general fund balance back down to the board prescribed 12 to 15%. And we allocated that during that conversation into post-employment benefits. I just want to verify that the board still intends, because we'll make that payment before the end of the year, that $1 million to go to OPEB, strictly to the retiree health care, not dividing it out into the defined benefit pension or splitting it, which we had done in a prior year. We'd split it. But right now, the biggest focus for us, obviously because we have to file that corrective action plan with the state on our retiree health care, our recommendation remains that that $1 million goes strictly to OPEB, and I just want to make sure that the board is still approving that as we have this conversation.
So, I just have a question about that. We have some relatively large expenditures that we're anticipating here in items C and maybe D. So, given that, are we still able to move that $1 million, or do we have to, or do we need to?
That $1 million has been basically allocated from the fund balance of at close of business of December 31st, 2017. So it's really just to bring it down. This does not have any impact on where we're at with the general fund at this point.
Okay.
And our recommendation remains the same, that the board would authorize us to go ahead and put that towards OPEB.
Okay.
Mr. Guzzo?
The only question I have, is that out of DPW fund or is that out of general fund?
That's the general fund.
General fund, so there's gonna be $1 million for general fund, where originally it was only 500,000.
No, it was more, we talked about allocating it differently. Do we want to put $400,000 on defined benefit pension? Do we want to, but all we listed it for in our audit was that we had $1 million for post-employment benefits. So there's no change to what we said we were going to do. What we had earmarked in our audit was $1 million towards post-employment benefits.
Right, yeah, but I mentioned it a couple times, and I thought at one point it was only 500,000 that the general was gonna fund.
No.
So it's $1 million that we're
It's
gonna.
$1 million.
And that's the same as it was last year.
We had $1.4 million last year. The only difference for 2017 was that we didn't issue the bond for the Concord Green project. Otherwise, we would have came in almost exactly the same as we had the year prior. So that's the only difference. Otherwise, we'd be talking about $1.4 million here also.
But the bond, I know this is off topic, but the bond for Concord Greens and the works now, correct?
Yeah, we've already received.
That's closed.
Okay.
So everybody's okay with $1 million on the OPEB?
And then any other changes, the changes I listed are what I have so far, and I went back through all my budgets to see, and if there's anything else that the board would want us to consider, you know, a shift of funding, an increase, a decrease, whatever, you can let me know if that's what the board's desire is, because then we'll go ahead, we'll publish new hard copies, have those for you for the first week in December. You still have one more meeting where you can discuss any changes. We could probably have them to you for the meeting of the 27th, and then we'll finalize it. The next time you see it, it will be because we're approving the budget for fiscal year 2019.
Okay. Mr. Lehman, at the master plan that we're looking at, initiating this next year pretty much, right at the beginning of the year, there's funds in there for community gatherings for input sessions, what have you, and
Correct.
also surveying our residents as well.
Correct.
So I see that, and I've talked with a few of our trustees that they would like to see us do some of that, and I mentioned that, you know, our master plan will incorporate some of that, but,
We had allocated $40,000 for fiscal year 2019 to be spent on that. Plus, we had some additional funds that were also allocated just from a board's perspective on, at the request of Trustee Mansour, on some areas that actually tie in quite well with the master planning process, which we could include in that surveying. I think I had mentioned to you that I had done it in my previous municipality, and we hired that company to go out and do the survey for us, and it became like such a wealth of information. It's such an awesome tool, especially when you're doing a master plan update, to really get that pulse of what the constituents are trying to share with you on what they think are the priority items, and I think that could be incorporated within what we've had budgeted for fiscal year 2019.
so just so, I think I know it is, and maybe more for the public, but to ascertain from the public what they would like to have in our community that we don't currently have, you know, that's missing, and where they would want to have it located is basically what we're looking at asking, right?
Yeah, you know, you get back information and it'll tell you the percentage of the population. The nice thing is you get a breakdown. It's breakdown demographically, by income level, by age. You know, it's just, you get to see how the folks are really trying to tell you whether they strongly support it, they support it, they're neutral, or they don't like it. What we used it for back then was you look at somebody who either supports or strongly supports, and you'd be able to look at all these different topics. Maybe it's road funding. You look at it and you say, well, we got 68% of the people that either support or strongly support an increase. Then you should pay attention to that, you know, as elected officials. You look at some things, maybe it's, you know, something about fire services, and you look at it and you say, everybody's pretty happy with what we have, let's maintain what we have, we don't have to really think about changing that. So you can ask a lot of questions in that survey. It's just such an amazing wealth of information. I mean, I could share with the board the results that we had from my previous community, just so that you had an idea of what that looked like, and I think give you a better idea of what we're talking about on that survey.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Mr. Mansour?
So, I just wanted to mention about the funding for the master plan at $40,000. Director Lloyd has put together an RFP that is sent out. I think we're supposed to get feedback next week sometime. But it was developed, it was scoped in such a way to be extremely broad. And I have every anticipation that we are going to get responses back from the people we sent it out to, or people who respond, that will be a huge range. So I guess we just have to keep in mind that, you know, we have, the board's expectation is to scope this thing at the $40,000 level, and have us, you know, pick up some of the work that has been done by previously outside firms to help, you know, kind of fit it all in the budget.
I agree with Trustee Mansour. I think that when you look right at the RFP, you might get some that are saying for, you know, we'll do your update for 20,000. You'll get some that say we'll do your update for 70,000.
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be some wild swings in there. It'll be interesting for the planning commission as they start to review that. I mean, we want something comprehensive, and the conversations that we've had leading up to this, remember the planning commission joint meeting between the planning commission and the board meeting, I mean, we have a really good document, but is it still relevant for the next, you know, 10 years or 20 years more? Those are questions that, you know, we want a pretty comprehensive review of this thing. We don't want a rubber stamp, but we can pay anybody $5,000 to put a rubber stamp on it, call it updated, and we met the law. But do you want to meet the spirit of the law, or do you want to meet the spirit of why you master plan your community?
Yeah, very good point. We want quality, not expediency.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Anything else on the budget?
Yes,
Okay.
I provided you with some information on this most recent election. And considering we have had 2 AV counting boards, and we were here till 3 o'clock, and they started at 8 in the morning, with the number of people that are wanting to vote absentee ballot, and with the amendment to the Constitution that allows anybody for any reason to ask for an absentee ballot. I know that I definitely need an additional one in order to operate 3 AV counting boards, and I would ask for a second, and I'm thinking that the original cost for the machines was $5,000 each. Because again, if we have people that can come in and register to vote, I think we're gonna need one for that as well, so that people aren't going out to all the different precincts. I've talked to State Representative Sneller and suggested that with this proposal, that if people want to register to vote and vote the same day, that we have one location in each municipality, and it would be our office, so that they're not wandering around and upsetting all of the people that are voting at the polls. So my request is I definitely need one, but preferably 2 for next year, so we can be geared up and ready to go in 2020 and not wait, because that can be February and March when all of that starts.
There probably will be some additional costs too, won't there, Ms. Lane? I mean, one of the things that they're going to have to set up with the same-day registration is a way to make sure that I'm not registering here at a precinct in Grand Blanc. If it doesn't go the way that you'd like it, where only the clerk's office is going to be able to register and you have to vote there. Let's say they set it up that you can register anywhere and vote the same day. They're going to have some type of system that communicates with each other. Otherwise, I can register at 10 different locations and
Right.
vote in 10 different locations. So I'm thinking that there may be some additional expense
Right.
once they get into setting that system up, because I doubt that necessarily the state will be willing to pay for the expense of everybody to do that. Mr. Thomas?
Through you to Clerk Blaine, you're requesting 2 more absentee boards?
No, 1 absentee board and 1 to be prepared for those people that will want to vote and register to
you
vote
want-
and vote as well.
So you want an increase of $10,000 plus another $5,000 for wages?
What's an AV board, county board run?
Yeah, what's the cost?
Well, you have to buy the voting machine,
Well-
which is $5,000.
Right, and
And
then
then
there will
wages.
be 5 to 6 people, because they have to duplicate, and that takes 2 people away.
That's $2,000.
So,
That's $7,000. And then the other machine would be here, so the voters that are registering same-day registration could vote here. So you want another machine, and that would include how many staff?
I think that we'll have to sort of play it by ear and see what the
Well,
state legislators
if
do.
we're adding it to the budget, I mean, we need to give Superintendent Lima some direction.
Well, let's-
So are we
yeah.
talking 20 grand?
Let's
No,
let- yeah.
5, 10.
I don't know that we're prepared tonight to figure out that budget. I think Ms. Lane, we
I'm
asked
just
her to come up
bringing
with what
something
that
up.
number is
Right.
and bring it back to us, but,
In the final budget, right?
yeah, cause I think she needs to take a look at what the costs are for all those things that you mentioned, Mr. Thomas. Those are good questions, but,
And that'll all be in 19's budget, right?
well, that's what she's requesting.
Well, all
There's no
the-
funds coming out of 18's budget for it, is there?
no, we don't
No.
have any money in
Yeah,
2018.
Yeah. Mr. Massey?
Well,
You had your hand
you
up?
hit the nail on the head, Supervisor.
What's that?
We're not in a position to discuss that tonight, I wouldn't think.
As far as the
No, I'm
amount?
just bringing it up so that the board is aware of it right now,
Yeah.
because that's on the board to bring up anything that needs to be thought about for the final budget.
Yeah, because the superintendent has to put it
So
in the
Ms.
budget,
Lane,
right?
you'll put together some numbers and forward them to Mr. Limita and I. and,
Absolutely.
Mr. Limita, did you have?
Yeah, if I just need the breakdown, I mean, I'm looking at, for elections in 2019, and we put $9,000 in for the purchase of 50 new laptop computers. So if you would just give me what you think that's gonna be, and then a breakdown of, I mean, I can pull what it costs us for the AV board. If you're gonna do one full AV board, I mean, I can pull that cost out of payroll. I just need to know, like, if that's what you.
I won't need, unless some other special election comes out, I won't need AV boards next year with just the school special election. So that would be planning for all of the elections in 2020. But the machines I need to get now, because the election process starts in February of 2020.
Okay.
So I want them ahead of time.
Well, clearly, the new amendments to the Constitution are gonna cost us a few more dollars, especially to upgrade, you know, to be able to handle it. Probably need to look at what, you know, where we're at. How are we doing so far this year on our budget for your department? We doing all right, or
Oh, no,
should
we're
I not
probably
ask?
gonna, it's, you know, there'll be probably an amendment. You have an issue at the end of today too, and
Okay. well,
to
we can
deal
talk
with,
about
I
that.
mean,
Okay. All right. Anything else that we want to talk about on budget?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
The chief of police has indicated that there has been a lot of need for the attorney to go to court and handle all the tickets our police department handles, and I just, I don't know how our attorney or our attorneys, Mr. Laddie and Mr. Belzer, if there's a need to increase with all the time they're working on these tickets and that, and the marijuana, if there should be some additional increase in their wages. I don't know how we determine that, but I certainly know if they're getting busier and busier, that some consideration might be given to that
Mr.
point.
Lemata?
That request goes to the attorneys during the budgeting process, and they didn't request anything at all. They spend approximately $40,000 per year in that type of enforcement, and they're not anticipating that it's gonna, they didn't request an increase for fiscal year 2019.
Okay, thank you, I didn't know how that was handled, I just,
While we're there, did we give an increase to Attorney Laddie for the DDA work?
He's not been hired as the attorney of record for the DDA.
Okay, so that would be separate or coming up, or whoever.
Whatever the DDA, whatever
DDA would do
direction
that
they may
now.
hire a different attorney, they, you know, we don't know. David has, just as part of his retainer for us, has agreed to help kick it off at the beginning.
The ordinance and such, and the.
Yeah, he's
public
helping us
hearings.
with the starting up.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, anything else on budget? Okay, we'll move forward. Operational issues, Mr. Lemata. The board will consider a motion to accept the proposal from Redstone Architects to provide an update to the Township Civic Center Campus Master Plan to include the former Playland property in preparation for proposed new DPW facility. I know I've talked to Mr. Lemata about this for a couple of years, and, you know, we just like we have a master plan for the entire township, this is more or less the master plan for, you know, planning for the future for the township campus.
So this really started, you know, with the purchase of the former Playland property and trying to do some long-range planning on, you know, we bought it for the DPW's expansion. And so we started to talk about what we're gonna do, and I don't know how many of you know this, but this goes back to the original in 2003 when they did the entire campus master plan, and Daniel Redstone was the consultant who worked on it then. And then it moved forward through some iterations until 2008, where it resulted in the building of the police building. So we contacted him knowing that he had all the background information and the original assumptions going all the way back to 2003, which are actually pretty interesting when you see what they projected for general administration, police, DPW, fire. So we contacted him because we knew he had the background information, asked him to come forward. And so what he did is he gave us another proposal, and while I was talking with him, we talked a little bit about, you know, with the fire department, with township administration building, and I told him at that time that I didn't believe that we would be making a move on the township administration building until at least when the police bonds were either paid off or close to being paid off, which would be closer to 2031. But at the same time, while he's doing this and he's doing an update to the existing, should we consider about what it would look like if he took an update based upon new assumptions? And so I had him actually do it strictly based on the DPW, with that being the priority. But then I thought he should consider fire, and he should consider the township office as well, because we added 15 acres to our overall campus. And the last thing we want to do is put the DPW footprint into the middle of that, and then find out 5 years down the road that, wow, we actually need to upgrade our fire department on this end of the township. And now we put the DPW right where we probably should have had the fire department, or we need an ingress or egress road coming through that allows them access to Dort Highway and Saginaw. So then that changed our conversation. So that's why he provided, and you guys all have it in front of you tonight, that just talks a little bit about his breakdown of what it would be. But bottom line, it's more about putting together the DPW needs assessment, and that comes to $15,360. And that's really what we needed to have done, was that. I just think that while we have him working on it, if we were, and it depends on how the board feels about it, if you think that you don't have any concerns about the future of what might happen if we have to do something with the fire department here, or if we have to do something with the township hall, then I would suggest that you go with the $15,360 and let's take care of the DPW. But knowing for long range purposes, you got one chance to get it right, and it's harder to change it once you add a building there. I'd ask the board to just consider a complete master plan update. It's just something that we'll continue to work on, and saying this is our needs assessment, here's our possibilities, here's where we can put these buildings, this might make sense for our overall campus project plan for the next 35 to 50 years. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or so with Director Sears, who's been on the conversations with Daniel Redstone.
I appreciate you putting together the proposal, Dennis, or Mr. Lehman. I think, one of the things as a board that isn't real sexy is necessarily looking out, next 20 or 30 years. We like to do things that have immediate impact and show that, hey, we're spending money wisely, on the immediate things that everybody can see. But we're taking a look at what we're going to do with our DPW, and like you say, it could impact us, even if it isn't 10 or 15 years from now. I'd rather have people say, wow, these guys really thought about how they were doing things, rather than just plopping this thing in the most, easy place. But, we've all seen that hindsight is, 20/20, and I'd rather look at the long term and where we're going to be.
It's interesting, the conversation that the needs assessments change. What we thought we knew and used for assumptions in 2003 obviously are different in 2018. Simple things like locker rooms, they no longer try to build, male and female locker rooms. You build locker rooms, and then you have separate shower rooms. It really cuts down on the space required. Rather than build a complete one for men, for women, you build a locker room where you've got your locker, and then you have individualized shower compartments with changing rooms. So that took took that space that used to be required down to less than half. Then you look at how we're moving to electronic document storage. Well, in all those big rooms that we used to have to hold all of our building plans and that we had to keep forever plus a day, those things are going into being electronically stored, and so we have less need. So it's really changed the space. And then the other interesting thing was just what they used to block out for like individual offices and how many square foot, and the way that those have come down. And again, primarily because you don't need the file cabinets, you don't need the storage that you used to have. You need to have a room for a split screen monitors and some very limited storage. So those have really shrunk. So it takes that exterior footprint of a building and it brings it down quite a bit with just the changes in technology. And those are things I hadn't really thought about until we started talking about, here's a new way of looking at and we're not talking about having him to completely design interiors and all this. It's more about what would be the footprint. Give me a block and show me where that would be on this property. They would have designed the interior for the DPW because that's the one that's our priority, but the other ones are really just block footprints about, okay, this makes sense. Your needs assessment says you're going to need this over the next 35 years. Let's see how this works within the property itself.
Ms. Lane?
One of the reasons, major reasons, we're moving the DPW out of this building is because when they're working on the the HVA system is bringing the fumes back in and making some of our employees sick. And I think the same thing is applicable to the fire department. But in addition to that, both are advancing in what they need. So besides the safety to employees in this building, they need adequate space to do their job better. And so I'm in favor of our looking at the entire campus with relationship to the DPW and the fire department.
Well, just the technology alone, I mean, Dennis, or Mr. Lehman, you mentioned, you know, the paper storage, you know, well, you look at the rooms where our hard drives and, you know, things are kept, and that probably could use, I mean, it needs to be a cooled room instead of just a broom closet that got converted.
Right.
But, so I mean, the same with the fire, same with, our other departments needing to make sure that, that we're designing those for the future as well. Ms. Lane?
From a more long-term person here,
Yes.
to the newbies. I think converting this old armory into our offices,
They've
that
done a
all
great
the
job.
boards have done a great job to have
Absolutely.
it look like an
No.
up-to-date,
Absolutely.
and so,
No, I agree. I just mean the technology we need to plan for. Mr. Atkins?
Just one question, the $33,490 for the project, what's the funding source?
So what we'll have to do, and again, this will be spent in fiscal year 2019, so if the board approves this, we're going to have to make that adjustment into the fiscal year 2019 budget. The DPW will be paying that $15,000, but then the other stuff's going to have to be allocated out to the general fund for the remainder, the $95.60 for the township hall and the $85.70 for the fire department. That will have to come out of the general fund as an expenditure. But again, fiscal year 2019, so we'll change the budget before you approve it.
So none of it will come out of 18 at all, right?
Correct.
Would capital projects figure in there at all with this, or?
It's not, I mean, you can make the argument that it's capitalized, because anytime you're doing the planning for a capital building, we could take it out of capital projects, because it's capitalized, you know, no different than we do with DPW capital. This is a capitalized project. We're gonna create a building, and so anything that goes into that, the planning, engineering, whatever, does get picked up into that capital account.
Mr. Mansour?
So I have a question about Redstone Architects. So apparently they were involved in the study that was done in 2013. Did we look at any other architects or any other things, or did we kind of like sole source this?
I didn't, and the reason being is that they put the initial study together going back to 2003. And so I met with him because I wanted more information about, initially just about that initial 2003 and whether they had plans that they could show me about what they did with the buildings. And then from those conversations, the cost savings really comes in from him being able to come in and say, I'm gonna take what I had before and just update it to 2018 versus starting completely from scratch and somebody coming in who has to completely go through, interview everybody, put the entire thing together. Because while some things have changed, it's not as drastic as you might think. It's more about the assumptions, not about the head count or that. It's more about what we already, you know, the paperwork that we already have put together for it.
Any idea what it cost us in, what was it, 2003?
I
Okay.
don't have a clue.
I don't remember.
I mean, if you guys are interested, here's the 2003 study. You can read it. It's really interesting.
I was there.
And it really, this breaks it down, like you look at the treasurer's department, for example, and it talks about, you know, what net space area and what's gonna be in there. And it's that private office with a small conference table, 4 guest chairs, 1 4-shelf bookcase, so that they come up with net square footage of 275 square feet. And as deputy treasurer, same thing, the head cashier, work area, conference room. I mean, it's very comprehensive. And like I said, it's interesting in that you read about the assumptions of where we thought we were gonna be. You gotta remember that. But after 2000, I mean, we were growing at such an incredible fast pace that they thought we would be pushing up around 47,000 people by 2015. You know, and that didn't happen obviously for very clear reasons. But are we gonna, if you start looking out again at the next having facilities that are gonna be prepared for the next 30 years plus. Will we be at that population? I believe we will be. I don't think we're staying the same or going backwards at any time soon.
Well, what, Mr. Atkins?
Just adding to Trustee Mansour's question, you know, I've seen a few times now that we've gone away from collecting 3 bids. It seems to, you know, we shouldn't make a habit out of it. And I know sometimes other people don't bid, or there's some things that come up that make sense to just go with the person that has history in the project. However, if you look at our policy that's all before us tonight, I don't know if we're gonna actually talk about that at some point, but, you know, it spells out in here real clear, you know, when to waive or modify the bidding process and what that procedure is. And this does not fall into that, and there's been a couple that have not fallen into this procedure as well. So I just get a little concerned that we're getting down a path of maybe not collecting bids.
Mr. Mansour?
Thank you, and it seems like we're substituting the work of collecting the bids by just presenting it to the board and just, you know, asking us to go along with the recommendation. So-
Mr. Lehman, is there a time crunch or anything that would prevent us from?
Absolutely not. If the board wants to
Put it out for bid?
go back and have somebody start from scratch and redo the whole thing, we can certainly put those RFPs out and do that. We're not under a time crunch to when we're gonna start building the DPW. This, like I said, this came about from going back to the original 2003 and having the conversation with them.
Yep.
There's absolutely no time concerns from our standpoint if the
Yep.
board wants to go back and just
Sure.
re-advertise it, you know.
And I told Mr. Lehman that throw it on the agenda, that I'd like to have our board give input, so.
Sure.
It's not him pushing this issue forward, it's just merely for our board to consider the options. And if we're not under any kind of time constraint, then, you know, if the board wishes to put it out for an RFP or what have you. Ms. Lane?
My concern has to do with funding. Since it is the campus plan, why would we take money out of the general fund or the DPW fund in order to fund it? I think it should come from the excess money that we say is being generated by the .7 mils.
For the campus
For the
project fund, you're
campus
saying?
project. That's what I would do. I mean, I prioritize it where it's being used, is my opinion.
Well, it was my question with regard to being a capital expenditure, if that would
Well,
qualify. And I guess, you know,
but
it's
the
up to
ca-
this board to decide.
The campus fund is
Project.
different than the capital improvement project too.
The fund is really unencumbered, it's not, I mean, it's
Right.
just campus projects. I
Right.
mean, you can put it wherever, that's when we talk about, do you wanna put it on OPEB,
Exactly.
do you wanna move it? You have $2.6 million in there.
Right. Well, what's your thoughts, Mr. Mansour?
No, it's fine. I think that's a good suggestion, a campus fund to fund campus improvements from a campus fund.
I mean, in terms of, do we go out for a RFP, or I'm looking for direction for our board?
You know, I guess that in this particular case, there's probably a good reason for us to continue on with the existing source, the original source. But again, as Trustee Adkins mentions, I mean, we seem to get these things on a pretty regular basis, and I'd like to have us comply with our procedures.
Okay.
So,
Mr.
Chair,
Massey?
let me make sure that I understand this. Let me sort of rephrase what I think you said. Moving forward, we will have 3 bids?
Well, our policy, but again, there's exceptions to that.
Right.
And Mr. Guzak?
I would think that if Redstone bid in it, they'd come in lower, because they've got a heads up on the whole thing. It seems like they'd come in lower than the other 2 guys, because they have to start over, wouldn't they?
I would assume they would, because they already have all the
Right, they got all the
background
facts, they say,
information.
well, we can do it for this, and the other people have to do everything more, so you can do the bids, and we got plenty of time to do it, but I would think.
Mr.
Redstone-
Treasurer, that wasn't my concern. My concern is moving forward, would be 3 bids.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that, yes.
That's my concern.
Yeah, I understand.
So with
Okay.
regard,
Yeah, that's a good
so
point.
that's in our policy, and
But I just thought on this other one, if we are gonna do the bids, and I thought that's what we were talking about tonight, because we're not gonna fund it in 18, that we could get the bids, Redstone probably would win that one because they've got such a leg up on the whole thing.
But Mr. Treasurer, I thought, if I'm wrong, correct me, Mr. Trustee Mansour, tonight we're gonna accept this as it is. That's what my understanding.
No,
well, I think the consensus
think
that I'm
we would.
hearing is that, what? Is
That
your
we
agreement?
would accept this one.
that's not what I heard.
That's what I heard.
Well,
That's what,
There hasn't been a motion yet, so nothing's taken place.
Okay.
Somebody at that end make the motion then.
Okay. I agree with trustee Mansour on this one because there is some history and, you know, and some reporting. The only comment was as we go forward, you know, we know a lot of times we put things out to bid and we know probably more than half the times you get people that just no bid and you wind up with only one bid. But at least we should discuss that and know that and not just,
Not go that route.
not go that route, at least get back to our policy, but I'll make the motion to accept this one. Let's see, where are we at here? Item A, right? With the, I don't know, should we, add to that motion, the source of funds being the campus,
The
Project
auditors,
fund.
project fund? Maybe I'd add that to my motion.
Support.
Any further discussion?
I just have a question on that. Part of that fund is set up to, you know, pay the future bond and stuff, and so I think we'd wanna look at that to make sure we're sufficient on it. Cause part of it is to build up, cause it does ratchet up every year. You know what I mean? I mean, our bond payment doesn't stay the same, it gets higher every year, and so,
But we have 2.6 million in
And
that
and
fund.
we're talking about 33,000.
And that 2.6
Well, and
million is
if-
after the bonds are paid, correct?
Yeah, we've got $2.6 million in there right now, and we're slated to make bond payments and still put another $230,000 in addition this year, plus what we were showing last year, or for fiscal year 2019, we're in the same position.
So the $2.6
so
million
it's gonna cover both the ones in
I mean,
19.
we can take it out of, the money that we would have allocated this year to go back into the town, to the campus projects fund, the additional 200 plus whatever, we could take the $33,000 out of there, out of the 0.7 mils that we took in, specifically set aside for campus projects. It would just reduce the amount that we put into that fund balance until the board decides what they want to do with that fund balance that exists, the $2.6 million. So next year it'll probably be $2.8 million by the time you decide if or when you want to go in another direction with it.
You'll be coming to us with a proposal on taking some of that money for the OPEB like we discussed last month.
I think that it would be a great conversation to have on a future agenda, you know, and it's anytime after the first of the year potentially about, you know, we're rethinking it. We're not gonna dedicate that 0.7 mils that the board wants to be, maybe you wanna dedicate 0.5 mils or 0.6 mils or something and keep that going. I mean, it's just a good conversation to have for a future agenda item and future positioning.
The money's not going anywhere. Okay, so we've got a motion and a second.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion on this particular item?
I just, one more last
Yes,
thing.
Mr. Mansour?
I mean, one of the reasons that I really am supportive of this is because I like to give our local businesses an opportunity. We have plenty of fine firms around here that do this, and so I want to make sure that they have an opportunity to bid on the business here for the township.
I agree. I wouldn't have any problem if we put it out for bid.
Okay.
Wait a
I
minute,
thought
the motion
was
is
already
to,
made.
Right.
Right.
But I'm just saying, if somebody had made the motion, to put it out for bid,
Be fine, too.
I'd have
Yep.
no problem. Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to go with Redstone. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item B, the board will consider the request from the Parks and Recreation Commission to continue the current practice of pavilion rental, allowing renters to have the option of alcohol included in their agreement with the additional liability insurance provided. Good evening, Ms. Hudson.
Good evening. So I am here again to make this request, and it is on behalf of the commission. This information was discussed at our September meeting, and with a 5-2 vote, the commission did approve to move this request forward to the township board. In 2018, again, we had no incidents or problems with the runners who did have alcohol at the pavilions, and so we would like to continue this practice in 2019.
Were there some other items or something listed that, I heard there's, 3 items on, or 3 lines here, and there were 8 somewhere else or something?
I can't recall, I'm not sure.
There's no other provisions that we're not aware of that,
No.
Ms. Lane?
There has always been the policy, and that's what we're adopting, is continuing the same policy we started
Right. I'm aware
years
of
ago,
that.
so.
But I just wanted to clarify that there's nothing else that we're unaware of that, as far as items.
I do not recall what that is about.
Okay.
What it was,
Mr. Atkins had his hand up, and then we'll go to Mr. Thomas.
How many years have we allowed alcohol, or how many years have we been approving this?
Well, you've been approving it, this is, I think, the 4th. The alcohol has always been allowed with the pavilion rentals. I mean, it was kind of something that I wasn't aware of, that it was a township ordinance, and nor was Mr. Creasy prior to me. So there's never been a year that renters have not been allowed to have alcohol.
It's just
So
in the
40
last
years.
4 that we
It came to
officially
light,
approved
right,
it.
yes.
And we made it a policy to approve it annually in case there ever was a problem, that we could rein it back in the following year. Actually, we don't even have to wait till the following year. If there was a problem, we could rein it in the next week if we needed to.
Correct.
But, Chief, have we had any issues with alcohol in the park? Okay. I know that, I'm not necessarily an advocate for alcohol in any shape or form. I will state that I do work in that industry, and that I do alcohol server training for restaurants, taverns, golf courses, and what have you. And my perspective is it's better to control alcohol rather than turning a blind eye towards it. I like the idea of us being able to regulate it, rather than pretending that we won't have any alcohol if we tell people no alcohol. Obviously, it's been going on for the last, 30 years?
40.
40 years, and if we say no alcohol, there still will be alcohol. And in terms of the area that we allow it in, I don't know, maybe that language needs to be clarified if it's not clear, but I thought it was just in the pavilion.
It is. It says that they can have it as part of their pavilion rental. If we need to add some verbiage that says within 10 feet of the structure or something like that, that certainly can be added with no issue.
Mm-hmm. But I think, by telling people up front that, hey, if there's alcohol, we need to know. You need to, what is it, $1 million that we need to have in coverage?
It's on their homeowner's policy.
Right.
They
So
present
have
us
to
the
name us
certificate.
as an additional insured. So if I'm renting the pavilion, it really sends a message to me that this is serious, that I better make sure that there's no monkey business, or I could end up being liable.
Correct.
So, Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I have 2 concerns, and the director raised one. Could we get it changed where it's within, has to be within 10, alcohol can only be within 10 feet of the provision?
They could probably tighten it up, but I don't know
Certainly.
that's been an issue.
We can add that verbiage.
I mean, if you could add that, I would definitely appreciate it. I think it's a major
Okay.
concern because someone could go 500 yards away over into another area, and if we would have an accident in the future, an incident would occur in the future, then we may be liable for something that we are not prepared for.
Maybe
Also,
tighten that up. Okay. What was
Yes.
your other point, Mr. Massey?
my other point is about liability insurance provided. How is that normally done?
They bring us the certificate.
And that certificate mean what? It means what?
It's an addendum to their homeowner's policy.
It names the township as an additional insured. So if there is an incident, the township is covered by their policy.
Well, let me reverse my thinking on this. Let me ask the question a different way. How would you know that the liability insurance certificate is valid? How would you know that?
Well, we would check the date and their address is against what they have presented as their address.
That's all you would do? So, in other words, you're saying you wouldn't know whether it was valid or not?
What
Well,
happens
I
is the
think it's a-
insurance company will name the township as the additional insured, and therefore, if we're an additional insured, they're stating that we're covered. If for some reason they cancel the insurance, they're supposed to let us know, but I don't know, they probably bring it in fairly close to the time of the rental, I would guess.
Yes.
Well, let me ask the question a different way. If somebody had a fake
Frank,
certificate,
right.
how would you know that?
I don't know.
agree. I think all you have to do is you have to call that insurance company and say, is this certificate correct or not? I just want to verify this certificate. It's no different than a lien waiver. When I'm getting reversals on that, I call and say, did you actually sign this? Is this correct? Have you been paid?
Okay.
So if you could just do that, that would help you out, right, Joe? And I think it's a good point.
That's the point I'm trying to
Right,
make.
that's the point.
Just because someone gave you a
Piece of
certificate,
paper means nothing.
you can make anything you want from most of the computers today, and you wouldn't know whether it was valid or invalid
Right.
unless you call and check.
Yep.
Okay.
I
Can
have
we
a question
include
about
that?
this
We can
insurance.
include that.
Okay.
Good points, Mr. Massey. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, the question I had is, I'd like to address it to the chief. I know we're talking 10 feet. Do you have a certain range that you would like to put in there? Because you're the one that has to, you know, protect the area. So is 10 feet workable or whatever? Because that way you'd have the grounds, and whatever you feel is best. 10's a great suggestion, but I just want his comments.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have a number in my head, you know, whatever the board's discretion is on that. You know, preferably when you keep it to the pavilion, keep it to the pavilion, you know, 10 feet's fine, 15 feet's fine, but.
Or are you just
if
gonna
they
say
start
right in
wandering
the
out
pavilion?
to
Could
other
you
areas
just
of
say
the
in the
park,
pavilion slab and that's
Sure.
it? Would that be better for you?
The more constraining for me, the better, yeah, that's fine.
Well, I have seen people that put stages up at the end of the pavilion, so, which would extend the pavilion another 10 feet, you know, or 5 feet or whatever, so. I've also seen, Holy Family have events out there where they bring in a trailer that actually has a cooler in it that they park at the end of the pavilion. And adds another 10 feet, you know, to the end of the pavilion.
Yeah,
So
but when
that
they-
might be consideration.
But when they do that, they have the trailer, but the draft things are inside in the pavilion, so at least if you're on the slab, would that be better, Joe, than the 10 feet?
Well, when I think of a slab,
Well, the actual.
slab could be 3 feet, a slab could be 5 feet. I
Well,
don't know
no,
what the
I'm
slab is.
actually talking about the floor of the pavilion as the slab, okay?
I think we're getting into, dancing on pinheads, but I think, you know, the other thing is, don't go off that concrete or you're gonna get arrested. I think, you know, a few feet around the thing, I mean, you've got the grilling area that probably somebody might be drinking a beer or wine while they're grilling. I would hate to see us get so confined that, hey, you stepped across that line and now we're gonna have to arrest you. I think, or we're gonna have to kick everybody out of here.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
So-
Just a suggestion, maybe instead of where they can go, where they can't go.
Right.
You know, you can't go to the ball fields, you can't go to the playscape, you can't go to the trails, and they know it's just confined to that,
You
area.
can't go to your
Right.
parking lot.
Encompassing the pavilions.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, parking lot would be nice.
Mr. Thomas?
Do you wanna go ahead? Yes.
No.
I'm gonna go on a diatribe.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have a couple questions on the insurance. The registration form states that you bring a copy of your homeowners, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you just told Scott, or Supervisor Bennett, that in this motion it says, and it's the same motion as it was last year, verbatim basically, that there's, on their homeowners, it's an additional liability insurance. So according to this, and it's the same verbiage as last year, when I rent a pavilion that I'm gonna serve alcohol at, I bring in a copy of my homeowners, actually naming Blanc Township as an extra insured for an alcohol event? Or,
Yeah, that's what she's gonna call and
that,
verify.
I'm asking right now, because, so last year, when I took out a reservation for alcohol, I brought in my homeowner's insurance that actually named Grand Blanc Township as an extra insured for a alcohol pavilion party.
I'm not certain of that.
Well, I am. It doesn't happen. What you request is a copy of the person's homeowner's insurance. Am I correct?
I believe so.
So last year, at no times was Grand Blanc Township mentioned on their homeowners. All we've ever requested is a copy that we have homeowners insurance, correct?
If that's what it says, yes.
Okay. So last year, we said, yes, but there's gonna be a liability rider onto these people's homeowners insurance, actually naming Grand Blanc Township. That didn't happen. It's never happened that way. If you rent the pavilion, all you do is bring in a copy of your homeowner's insurance. Gentlemen and ladies, I'm voting absolutely no on this. And the reason why I am voting no on this is because when I look at a park, I think of a family. I think it's a family organization, a community organization. The liability that we open ourselves up for is, all we're doing is, I'm bringing a piece of paper that says I have homeowners insurance. We always thought that it was, we have a special Grand Blanc Township amendment, and that's what this motion states, that's what it stated last year and the year before. And it's never happened that way. When I look at a park, I think of family, community. Last year, we rented the pavilions for alcohol for 22 times, and we made $6,900. The risk reward is not worth $6,900 to me. I'm worried that something's gonna happen Supervisor Bennett, you're in the liquor industry, and, in teaching people how to serve and not overserve. These are family, these are functions in the pavilion, and we're not equipped to do that. And there's a reason why we're the only park in Genesee County that allows it. The city doesn't allow alcohol. No other municipality allows alcohol in their facilities. And I'm just worried to death that we're going to perpetuate alcohol where it's a part to me as a family. And that's the reason why I'm voting no on this, because the risk reward, we're putting our residents' lives at risk, allowing people to drink in the parks. Now, Chief Wiles, honestly, would you, for the officers that go through the park and they're trying to decide, if they're drinking beer, playing softball, are they part of this group in the pavilion? Now, I understand that we haven't had an issue with alcohol out there, but alcohol is a reason to happen. It's one of the reasons why I change my smoke detector batteries every year, because I haven't had a house fire, but that's why I change my batteries, so my alarm goes off. Would you personally, as the chief of police for Grand Blanc Township, do you recommend that we serve alcohol at the parks or not?
Well, I can tell you this as someone a department that takes traffic safety and alcohol on the roads as much as we do. It's a big deal for us. Anytime you add alcohol or a drug to anything, there's an increased risk. However, with certain controls, you can control that risk. By reducing certain opportunities to do things, you can control that risk. In 40 years since alcohol's been there, I'm not aware of an incident out there involving alcohol. In the 4 years since the boards have approved alcohol in the pavilions, I'm not aware of an incident involving alcohol there. My officers routinely patrol that park. Where we don't actively look for alcohol violations, if there is one in front of them, I'm very confident they will address it. I'm not aware of that incident occurring. So I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Mansour?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you, Chief, for offering your recommendation, and I appreciate that. And I think it's up to the board here to assess the risks of what goes on in the park. So, but I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chief.
And can I just say that we can certainly add into the rental agreement that Grand Blanc Township has to be named.
Right.
Right, and you get the certificate, and you're gonna call them back, and then
Mr.
you've got
Atkins?
restricted area.
I think
He had his hand up.
Personally, I would be satisfied with, I think it's real important from a public safety standpoint, enforcement standpoint, to tighten that up and define what it means within the park, so you're not just wandering around brown bagging a beer somewhere, and then I think that, we have to follow a policy that we want to put in place, and I'm not too familiar with how homeowners insurance works because it's a nightmare to change anything. You're on the phone 20 minutes. You just don't do these things unless you're prepared to change companies and save some money. But our attorney isn't here, but I thought that under your liability, your general liability, you're covered when you leave your house. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but maybe we're asking for something that people just can't get. I couldn't imagine it's very easy to call up, Progressive or whoever and say, hey, I want a separate alcohol waiver for the day for a pavilion and name Grand Blanc Township. I can't imagine the line of questioning and the documentation they're going to want to do that. I don't even think that's an easy phone call. So I think if we define what it is exactly we want and we're satisfied with, I would be satisfied with allowing it. But I think right now it's kind of loose.
We've actually asked all these questions of Mr. Laddie in the past when he was here, and it's not an issue to have the park named. But and also the township has liability coverage for alcohol serving as well. But Mr. Guzak, you had a comment? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but Mr. Atkins.
Yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted him. My only comment was that I think we have to have it restricted area that you're comfortable with, and it sounds like maybe 10 feet, like Joe was saying. And then when they get their certificate, which we haven't gotten supposedly, but once we get that certificate, you've got to call that insurance agent and say, is this correct or not? So that way you've got a signature and name that if something happens, well, this agent said this was correct, okay? And then you're off the hook, okay? And then we know that we're actually checking it and nobody's making these fake IDs. So I'm okay with it if we do those two things.
Mr. Mansour?
So I'm agreeing with Treasurer Guzak. I mean, we have a policy, we need to comply with the policy. We should be stated in an amendment. That's minimum requirements for us, and you'll verify the authenticity of the certificate. That's fine. When it comes to alcohol, I mean, I'm certainly one to use that responsibly, but there's another element to this because for the last number of years, 4 years, we've been offering this option in the park. We're creating a kind of a sequence of events, kind of events that people look forward to year after year. Those are the same kind of events that happen in Fenton, where they allow this kind of consumption in parks, and in Owasso, when they have other events, they do the same thing. These other places have found ways to do it. They do it responsibly, and I don't see why our township can't seem to do that same thing.
Making a motion, I'm sorry, Ms. Lane?
Not quite, but I'm willing to. I don't know if it helps you gentlemen, but for the simple solicitation permits that I have to give out, I forward that information as a double check by email to the chief, who verifies, and we verify the backgrounds, criminal backgrounds of people who are going door to door. Maybe it would make you feel more comfortable, and I'm not trying to make it tougher on UK, but maybe when she submits those things by email to the chief, if someone in the police department calls the insurance company, that's adding more credence to the to the checking that you need. And we do it for people going door to door for the safety of our residents. So
Mr. Atkins?
The only other thing I'd like to add is, since the township is, nothing against Parks and Rec, but I think since the township is named, or going to be named, or should be named on the liability portion of the policy, that the township should have that record here as well in the building. I mean, if something were to happen, it would be on us, not really on Parks and Rec, so I think we got to also determine how that record keeping or that paper trail is maintained and secured, because it could be I don't know, you to get into document retention and all that, so I would ask our
It's
superintendent.
not a bad
those.
suggestion. Just one thought on, well, I don't, at any time, we can change how we do this, too. This isn't like one and done. I mean, if next week we decide, hey, we came up with a better idea, we can add to this, but, Mr. Lehman, and then I'll go to Mr. Thomas, I think.
2 points. One I'll address, as someone who actually called their homeowner's insurance and got a rider to have alcohol at a township facility up north, they didn't even charge me anything for it, they just provided it. It was pretty painless. I called and explained to them that the township facility I was running required that I had the rider name in the township, and they just faxed it to me, emailed it to me, so it was painless and zero charge.
Any of you that have a wedding reception, you'll probably want to do that as well.
And we did require it at my previous municipality for our community center. We required the exact same thing, that you provided us with your homeowner's insurance with the township named as an additional insured. The other thing is I think you're right about, from a liability project for us to have on hand here, is that any of the pavilion rentals that request alcohol, you get the insurance rider and you submit them to me, so that we also have it on file for anything that anyone's having alcohol, that if there's a question even from police enforcement or whatever, we have it on hand.
No problem.
Well, then it notifies the police as well at that point.
Mr. Chair.
But, Mr. Thomas had his hand up, I'm sorry, Mr. Massey.
When you talk about other special events in other municipalities, like the Apple Fest, Clio Days, Linden Happenings, those are put on by the municipality or church, and those are something. Those are once-a-year events. This is an open invitation that anyone can have alcohol in our parks, and it's not a special event. It's want to have a group of guys over, drink some beers, play softball. I just think it puts so much liability onto our township when you're only talking 22 times for running this and generating $6,000. I believe a park, and I'm talking about our park, and being the only municipality in Genesee County that will actually allow alcohol usage at our park, I just don't think it's the wise thing to do and the right thing to do.
Well, we have a reputation, our police do, in Grand Blanc Township. Chief, are we the #1 municipality in the state for drunk driving arrests?
Number 4 across the state.
Or #4 across?
#1 township, though.
Per capita per officer, I'm sure we're #1.
Okay, so people know that, I think, but
So we're using.
yeah, and for these people, this is a special event. You know, if you're having a family reunion, this is as important as an Apple Fest event in Davison. But I really don't want to get into debate whether it's special or not, but you know, I think it's a difference in opinion. I tend to believe that, you know, by being upfront and people telling us that they're going to have alcohol, we can have our police keep an extra eye on it. We can get some insurance coverage. We can lay out the rules for them. Alcohol is going to be out there whether we say it's allowed or isn't. And as far as people coming out there to play softball and drink, that isn't what this permit allows. This allows advanced rental of and I think the pavilion's rented pretty much every weekend, isn't it? I mean, during the summer months or the warmer months.
We black out some weekends for the tournaments because
Yeah.
there's just too much overlap and not enough parking.
Right. So for
And-
somebody to just say, hey, we're gonna go out there and drink and play ball or whatever, I mean, they're gonna have to schedule it a year in advance to get the pavilion probably, #1. #2, it might not even be available.
Correct.
Though there's same groups that use it year after year is what I've found. I don't know if that's true or not, but
It is very true.
certain church groups have the same weekend, they line up to get their check into you so that they get that specific weekend, so, unless they're coming out on a weekday and doing it, but I doubt that they would need to rent it on a weekday, but maybe I'm wrong there too, but, Ms. Lane?
If you're ready for a motion, I am willing to make the motion to allow the Parks and Recreation Commission to continue the current practice of pavilion rental, allowing renters to have the option of alcohol included in their agreement with the additional liability insurance, adding the township as an additional insured, that the chief of police and the Director of Parks and Recreation establish a general guideline around the pavilion where it should be
We should just
limited.
say 10 feet or whatever.
10 feet.
Well, I know the barbecue pit is beyond 10 feet, that's why I'm not willing to say 10 feet.
So between the police chief,
And Director Edson.
But
And that all of the paperwork submitted to Parks and Rec as required is to be submitted to the superintendent for verification and to additionally notify the police department.
Miss, Madam Clerk, may I say something? I'd
Sure.
I'd like to include additional validation of the certificate.
was that in your motion, Ms. Lane?
No.
Yes.
No, it wasn't in
No,
there.
it wasn't
No?
in there.
Okay, well, will you amend yours?
That's fine, absolutely. I intended it to be
I'll
in
second.
there, it's required.
Okay, it's
Support.
seconded. One of the things that as a board I like to do is to come to consensus, and I know that we can't always have 100% agreement on everything, but I do like to make sure that as much as possible that we try to, everybody has a valid concern, with all issues here. I think everybody's looking out for the best interest of the township. Sometimes we have a difference of opinion on what that is. But I understand, Mr. Thomas, that you've got some grave concerns. I think our board shares your concern, but I think hopefully we're putting in place enough checks and balances that we're comfortable. Maybe you aren't comfortable still, but if you have any further suggestions, in the future, we'd be open to looking at those. But I think we put a number of things in place, and our history says that we've been good, and we can look at this any time we have a board meeting or call a special meeting if there's an issue.
Can I have, along with this motion, are you putting in the motion like it's been the last 4 years that it's brought up to the board every year for renewal? Because you didn't post that, or is this a change of an ordinance?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
The last 4 years, this has been brought up year after year after year.
Okay.
Clerk Lang didn't add that to her motion, or didn't state that in her motion,
That it
so
will be
are we
reviewed.
voting that this is an
I would add
ordinance
that
now?
to my motion,
it
Mr.
needs to be
Thomas.
added.
That'll be reviewed annually.
Okay, make sure
And
that's
that
the
motion does exist already. The board took that action 4 years ago, so that remains in perpetuity until the board changes that direction.
Oh, good.
Okay.
But I'll make sure that this motion is more definitive to ensure everyone is understanding of it.
Okay, so
Was
you're
that
gonna
Mr.
add in there that it's gonna be renewed annually?
Yes,
Mr. Massey, who seconded it?
I did.
I think
You
Mr.
okay with that?
Mansour did.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we will move to item C. The board will consider a motion to award a demolition contract for the former Playland property buildings to the low qualified bidder, Road, I don't know, is that Rhodey or Road Brothers Excavating of Saginaw, Michigan, for an amount not to exceed $350,000. Mr. Sears?
Good evening again. Before you tonight, we have a proposal to proceed with the demolition of Playland property, which includes all of the blighted structures, the house, the arcade, the restaurant, the putt-putt course, the buildings for the putt-putts and go-karts, the go-kart tracks, all of the asphalt, and grade the property for proper drainage. The AKT Peerless Consultants were hired to go out for bid and basically perform the project management for this. It went out for bid in early October, came back. We had a pretty good field of bids. We got 5 back, which I was quite excited about. You had the bid tab in your packets. They were all over the board, or I believe they were emailed after the packets went out. The bids were all over the board. There was a lower bidder than Rhodey Brothers, but we had determined that their bid was low enough that we weren't comfortable with the difference, and that maybe that would, that indicates that they'd be coming back to us for change orders to get them up to that threshold where everybody else was. So, in talking with them, they had some explanations on things that they intentionally left out and unknown parts of the property where everybody else assumed were there and bid on it. So we went with Rohde Brothers being the lowest, most responsible bidder. I'm not always in favor of just taking the lowest bidder because stuff happens, and we've certainly had that happen before. I do have a representative here from AKT Peerless who can answer any questions you might have in technical aspects, and also about the bidding process.
So there are basements underneath a good portion of those buildings, correct?
There's a basement underneath the house, and there's a basement underneath the restaurant portion of the building. So only portions of it.
Mr. Atkins? I'm sorry.
And this may sound like a stupid question, but, you know, I can understand being sensitive to bids and companies that do things that could come back to bite us in terms of building structures or
Sure.
making sure they're up to code and making sure the project is correct. But we're tearing something down, so does it matter if they're cheap? I mean, if you get the statement of work, they're just tearing it down.
It only matters because of the abatement. There's environmental abatement that has to be done that's monitored by the DEQ. And the quality work we're gonna get later on down the road, making sure all the footings are removed, making sure everything's compacted the way it should be. I'm not gonna lie, both of the companies here had quality bids. But just because their bid was lower, they could submit enough change orders to be higher than the awarded bid. That's my concern. That really doesn't matter. It is just tearing a building down, but there's actually a lot more to it that he could probably understand and explain to you better than I can, but I
Well,
do understand where you're coming from.
Well, we've had situations where we're putting pipe in the ground,
Sure.
and
Well, that's,
we end up with cost overruns due to
Yeah.
dewatering and what have you that get to be
Yeah.
pretty significant. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Director Sears. Based on what you just said, would it be fair for me to say that you want me to accept your word of your interpretation of the second bid without this board looking at the second bid? Is that a fair assumption?
yeah, I would hope that our professional opinions would be good enough for that. Yeah, I mean, he made his recommendation. He's a professional in the field. He's trained to do this.
No, I'm not asking that. I'm not. I think you're not. Let me rephrase
Okay.
my question.
Sure.
I'm under the impression that if you go out for bids, if I'm wrong, correct me, that the board should be given an opportunity to look at those bids.
Oh, okay.
And based on looking at those bids, some of us have previous experiences of bids,
Okay.
of demolition. So we can look at those bids along with you, making your comments versus our experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I did not know anybody here had any kind of experience in demolition, so that's why I didn't distribute the bids. I can't
I
understand.
sent it out.
Oh, you sent the bids out also?
Actually, Mr. Massey,
Oh.
right there, I printed out a copy.
That's the bid tab, yeah.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah, so,
I printed that out of.
That's the bid tab, and honestly, that's all that came with, I mean, the pricing is all that was with the bids.
Now, I would think, if I'm wrong, correct me, any company, I should say, that had, you correct me if I'm wrong too, sir, a company that has experiences in demolition, they can 99.9% of the time, they can almost tell you what they are expecting to run into by a surprise.
Yes,
Right or wrong?
I would say that's correct 99% of the time.
Yes.
In the situation we had before us, we do have that low bid from Beerline. We have worked with them in the past and they're highly reputable. The next responsible low bidder would be Rohde Brothers. We have also worked with them and they're also responsible contractors. My concern, I'm trying to think of the best way to display it, to illuminate it, is within the bid tab, if you are on page 1 Specifically, draw your attention to line item 3. The first column for a contractor beer line, their cost they provided for their demolition for removal of various features. The description that's in the bid tab is actually the description word for word from the bid tender form that was issued to all the contractors. So it's a very brief summarization of the work set out. Beer line quoted $58,000. Now, if you draw your attention across the board to the other 4 contractors, we have the second one, I would say very high price, very high price. Third one, also very high price. Rhodey and SC Environmental are more, in my opinion, a median price for the work that's set out before them. With that being said, all the contractors had the opportunity to visit the site. All the contractors had the equal documentation to provide their most responsible bid. From an email I received earlier today, there was a couple issues that added to my concern about the potential of going with beer line. Specifically, one small item, there was 2 wells previously identified in the original bid tender form.
2 what, I'm sorry?
2 wells, water wells. And the contract stated they had to do everything on the up and up to abandon them, seal them up. We issued an addendum number 2, and that included an additional well. I received a communication from Beerline earlier stating that their bid allowed for 2 on-site well abandonments even after the addendum that was issued to them, as well as every other contractor. That's a small detail. Moving forward, they also stated within their email from today, their site inspection indicated no indications of abandoned footings, buried demolition debris, etc. Therefore, they did not essentially consider for any potential of coming across historical foundations or unforeseens, whereas the other 4 contractors did. There's always that possibility. We all know working municipality records sometimes get flooded in basements. We lose records from the assessor's departments. We don't always know what's in the ground that we built on. I just feel that Rhodey, with their site investigation, at the same time the other contractors were on site, did a more thorough job to present the realistic cost of what's laid out in front of us.
I'm sorry, your name again was?
Oh, my name's Heath with AKT.
Tell me what your position is and with what AKT does and what...
My specific position is a little bit of everything. I've been with the company for going on 7 years now. I do anything from building material sampling to soil sampling, water, air, demolition oversight, demolition procurement, abatement oversight. I've worked with Genesee County before with the land bank for house inspections, so on and so forth, other site remediation activities, a whole blend of things.
So you work with demolitions on a regular basis, and
it's one of my passions.
And this is your background of expertise.
Yeah.
I figured that, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew that that's what you were here for as an expert on. Mr. Massey and then Mr. Guzak.
Sir, I have another question for you.
Yeah.
So based on what Director Sears said and my understanding of your short presentation, is that at this point, you don't see any work order changes at this point?
At this point, I would not foresee any change orders of all the known factors we have in front of us. AKT Peerless didn't only do the asbestos and hazmat assessment of the property, we also did phase 1 and phase 2 site assessment. That includes searching records, UST databases, checking the history of the property, doing the best we can to identify any potential unforeseens. And that, to me, us doing that due diligence on behalf of the township, I really feel consistent with Rhodey and SE Environmental's bid price, specifically on line item 3. Those 2 prices to me are more the median of what we anticipated to see for specifically line item 3. They're overall 2 prices for Rhodey and SE. Their total for the standard bid contract, that was the median that I was projecting. Ballpark 300, 3 1/4.
Well, I appreciate your professional opinion too.
Yeah.
Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, just a couple questions then. Are you gonna oversee the operation? Or
We
not?
do have limited oversight of the projects.
Live in oversight, right?
Yeah.
So you were just brought in to help with the bid process and help us get a good fit, right?
And additionally be on site too, from time to time. Essentially, the best way I could put it, I could be on a site 24/7. And it's not always necessary, because if we hire responsible contractors that are licensed, abiding by the regulations, in my professional opinion and my past experience, I would essentially recommend, as we part of our proposal that we submitted for our company, is limited oversight, just to stop and spot check, address any issues as they come forward.
Okay, so you are gonna check
Oh,
check
yeah.
the progress and everything there, and keep, when it, certain times pop up, you'll see foundations and things that have
Yes.
to be addressed and make sure it's done right, right?
Yep. And
Okay.
we will also be including, as I like to call, surprise visits over the contractors. Not essentially being the police department of environmental, but just to keep an eye on things to make sure that there's no bad egg in the contracting crew that's not paying attention to a specific regulation that day.
Okay, and then the other question is, I know on the second page, you know, it's talking about the $245,000 for the backfill of the whole building. That's not part of the 331,
Nope.
but it's not, right?
It's not.
So when Jeff was talking about the other part, he was just talking about leveling the basement areas and not the whole thing, because that's an additional 245,000.
Yep, at that price. And I would say at this point in time, as the township goes forward and further develop plans for that property, that is an item. These alternates on page 2, I would say, my personal opinion, that 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, and 4 can essentially be stripped out to a later date and time until the township's ready to further develop the property. With the standard bid items on page 1, that's designed to tailor towards the ongoing flow of the rainwater, stormwater flow, tying into the removal of the buildings, backfilling, and just kind of tapering it in and making
Right.
it connect with the current situation.
So we
towards the
don't
back.
need the items A1 or the back page at this point in time, right?
But to my understanding, in the future, it would be a part of the plan to redevelop
Okay.
the property.
Then the only other question is, and maybe between A1 and A2, they're both 245,000. It looks very similar. I don't see, it looks like almost, I guess the lump sum, the 6,000 is different, but they both say 600 quantity, but then they've got different amounts in there, but they both come back to 245, so I don't understand what the difference between A1 and A2 is.
The difference between A1 and A2, if I'm understanding the question correctly, is just the type of material going into the
Yeah,
hole.
one's sand and the other one's clay, but it's the same cost, right?
It depends on the contractor you receive the procurement pricing from. They
Well, I
might
know-
have a leg in on somebody where they
But
can
on,
get.
but Rhodey, he's got 245 for either sand or for clay.
Yep, and directly to the left of Rhodey's column that's presented in the white is the green column. Their estimated quantity is 17,500 per cubic yard for backfill. At the time of this bid procurement, we did not have solid numbers from Rowe Engineering to provide a grade plan. So the contractors were invited to site with the known factors of, we want the buildings gone, we want to backfill X, Y, Z the property, and potentially backfill the rest of the property at some point in time in the future. However, we do not have a specific number for everybody to go off of. So their field personnel who came out to assess the bid site visit were responsible for coming up with their own quantities at that point in
Yeah,
time.
because he came up with 17.5, where Bierman said 600.
Is that for the current bid, or is that for future work?
I would,
Future, so
Future.
we
Right.
can thread that needle.
Well, I know, I'm just trying to determine, so which is better, the sand or the clay? It seems like you'd want the clay, but I'm not an expert, and that's why I'm asking.
to my understanding, is just what you intend to do with the property. Let's say the front portion of the property right now where the commercial structure stands. If you're going to build on top of that with a new development, ideally you want to use Class 2 sand for compaction.
You only use sand.
Yep.
Okay.
And an engineer who handles grading plans and stuff, they can delineate further and possibly, to my understanding, put a mix of clay in first and then sand afterwards, depending on how big the structure is going to be. If they have to drive a bunch of pylons into the grounds, so on and so forth, depends on the size of the structure for support.
So, Mr. Heath, so we want to make sure we do this correctly. And if it ends up being botched, I mean, we know that there could be cost overruns, but if it ends up being botched we could end up paying a lot more if we went necessarily with somebody who wasn't reputable, I take it.
Exactly, yep.
Because of the remediation that's required and what have you.
Yep. For example, just to throw this out there, it's an overshare from another county that we work with. There was a contractor who was quote-unquote reputable in the local community of the city. Unfortunately, this year he got sloppy, he got lazy, and at the time we were not doing oversight of the contractors. He is now looking at facing upwards of $20,000+ in fine from the DEQ based on his sloppiness. His credibility has been shot down, and it's...
So it's important we do this right for more than just the reason of possible cost overruns.
Exactly, yep.
Okay. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, and the other question I had for Jeff, is this gonna be funded in 18 or 19?
This is funded in 19.
19, okay, good.
Miss,
Well,
Yes, Mr.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, let me clarify that. It's in 19's budget, but it's a 2018 project at this point.
Right, but when do we
It really depends on when we can start in the demolition process. They're proposing they're only gonna take 45 days to get this done. That puts us in January, so it would be a 2019 expenditure.
But the funds going out the door is when? December,
It
January,
would probably
February?
be January at this point, yeah. By the time we get soil erosion plans, and everything else, which Roe's working on, it'll probably be January.
Mr. Massey?
yes, I have a comment, and I'd like for you to respond to my comment. Has your practice been where when you do the research of the records that as such, sometimes those records don't reveal everything that you may run into?
And that has happened historically, and that takes me back to, as I mentioned earlier, basement flooding at a local municipality. They lost a majority of their assessor's records, and it really, back then it botched a couple of inspections that we did. It's just one of the standard limitations that we encounter as we do our due diligence through the ASTM standards. There's always that possibility, expect the unexpected. It makes you a little paranoid after a while, but just want to be best prepared for everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Atkins?
Let's see, I have 3 questions. So one is, for the demolition, one would be the source of funds. Would this be proposed the campus fund, campus improvement fund?
This is Public Works capital projects. Because
Okay.
it's owned by the enterprise will pay for it.
So it's DPW, right?
Correct, yes.
All right, and then have there been any thoughts of, so the size of the property, did somebody said 15 acres, is that?
Correct.
You know, we're being this size of the township and considering the fact, I've talked to a few people about this within the county, and considering how sometimes we don't get our roads plowed or salted as quick as we'd like to, you know, there could be an opportunity to, you know, to look at that campus and say, is there an opportunity to take a little bit of that and partner up with the county road commission to make a satellite office? Maybe it's salt storage, maybe it's some of their plow trucks, you know, at least that way you get a little quicker service. They're
Sure.
obviously gonna start plowing where they drive out of.
Sure. I think that's a big part of what we're looking at with the plan with Redstone also. And then we mentioned before in a previous meeting, looking at those partnerships and seeing what we can offer, even if, because eventually we will have to incorporate some kind of salt storage. Do we accommodate the county so that they can store more salt on our property? Because certainly if they run out of salt here and they got to go all the way back to the Atlas garage, it takes time away from our residents. I agree. So yeah, I think we will look at that.
And then my last question is, when we did a couple of demolition projects in the city of Grand Blanc, I learned 2 things from that project. Was there was an opportunity to get a substantial savings based off the timing you enter the market to do the demo. So in one instance, there was the mire that was shutting down over on Pearson Road, and there were a lot of demo companies that were involved in that project. And they quoted, you know, they bid on the project just knowing that they wanted to be a player in it or considered. And their cost was like 30% higher, so they said, hey, if you can wait for a couple months, and this isn't real urgent, then this would be the cost kind of when we slow down or something. Did you consider any of the timing? And
Some of the timing was considered primarily for backfill, whether it be Class 2 sand or clay. To my knowledge, you can typically get those materials cheaper in January and February.
Okay.
But as far as their workload themselves, I can't speak on behalf of the contractor and how they framed up their pricing to complete the project, but that is a very good question to ask them, and I can make that inquiry.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Lane?
When you started, you did say Beerline was a reputable contractor.
Yeah, and I still stand by that they are a reputable contractor.
With your expertise and with your knowledge of the site and knowing what they've put down as prices, give me a guesstimate, because that's all it would be, of one or two things where you think that they would come back at us and say, oh, we goofed and we didn't put this in our bid and we want more money, where you think we'd give it to them?
My first instinct would be the sheer size of the property and the track they have to remove and the structures to remove. Based on my experience in the field, to submit a demo price for $58,000 for that much surface area, that's very questionably cheap. And that raises a red flag. It's something they could later on get involved in the project and say, hey, you know what, we misquoted, it's our fault, but we're going to need X amount of more dollars to remove this because of XYZ reason. Whether it be the stuff's coming up different than what they intended. Realistically in the field, it's hard to single in on somebody's reasoning when they try to justify a change order for themselves. It's very difficult.
Well was another one, right?
What's that?
The well that,
The well, and that being just a small attention to detail, that tells me, and if you flip to page 3 of the bid tender form, the back page, just a couple of things highlighted in yellow under Beerline. They had a math issue. They submitted the revised bid without acknowledgement of addendum 2. The revision was submitted, was only the bid tender form itself, which consisted of 2 pages. Standard practice, you receive the addendum, we change the bid tender form, you have to resubmit all your documentation, not just the 2 front pages. The remainder of the pages contains pertinent data all the way down to them signing on it again, but most importantly, the price they're agreeing to in the contract. As soon as I received those 2 pages from them after the addendum as their revised bid, I flagged that. Standard practice to me, and that's why it's in yellow. I would disqualify them typically if they had such error in their paperwork, because it tells me that they're not paying attention to the detail of the project, which takes me back to the well mention. Them specifically saying their price includes 2 wells, but not the 3rd well, which we clearly indicated was on site in a document they did have access to.
okay. Any other questions? I appreciate Mr. Sears too, bringing in gentlemen and, we're using professionals to look into this, to give us the best possible result.
Are they coming back with the-
So, do we want to take action on this item?
Yes,
Okay. Are you prepared to make a motion, Mr. Massey?
I move that we accept the $350,000.
So Mr. Massey's making the motion to award the bid to Rohde Brothers.
Yes.
Mr. Massey,
Yes.
for $350,000.
Actually,
Ms. Lane?
Mr. Chair, I would prefer, and I would like that amended, to go with the amount of the bid as specified at the time, so that our documentation for auditors and our motion reflect the same thing.
Well, let's ask Mr. Sears. It looks like there was a little bit put in there beyond the bid, and what's the intention?
There was, only because if there is a change order and we do a not to exceed amount of the exact contract, then I have to stop the project before I can come back to the board. Dennis has the authority to approve change orders at a certain percentage, but I think if there's a not to exceed amount approved by the board, that takes his authority away. Not to mention, there is a bid alternate in there for a couple transformers that we're unsure of if it's Consumer Energy's responsibility or if it'll be the contractor's responsibility, and I want to make room for that just in case the contractor does indeed have to take care of those transformers and remove them. Otherwise, once again, I'm going to have to stop the project before I can come back to the board.
I wouldn't want to stop the project, but I would think that the motion would be more accurate to accept the bid as presented with authorization for the superintendent to go up to $350,000
Sure,
if necessary.
sure.
Mr. Massey?
Yes, if the superintendent is willing to agree.
Per policy, I can already, on a DPW change order, I can already approve up to $50,000. We don't anticipate that we're gonna need an additional $50,000. That's why Director Sears asked. We believe if there is change orders, it's gonna be very minor. This is pretty standard. We've done this on most of the DPW contracts that we award, is to build in that small amount for change orders. But if you want it to be the exact price, that's fine. It just, I'll approve anything up to that amount.
I think she still wants to have the 350 in there, just say, we'll accept the bid with the capabilities to go up with change orders to get to that, right?
Yep, I believe that's what I heard.
Yes,
Mansor?
okay.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So we've got a motion, it's been seconded.
Did Mr. Mansour support it, or do you want me to support it?
Oh, I'll support.
All right, thank
Okay.
you.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item D, the board will consider a motion to approve the purchase of a 2019 International HV 607 SBA cab and chassis from Tri-County Trucks and a Henderson dump body with plowing equipment from Knapheide Truck Equipment for an amount not to exceed $215,000. Mr. Sears?
So before you have a proposal to replace one of our snow and ice removal dump trucks, the current truck, I believe, is a 2003. It is starting to see some serious mechanical issues, and we don't know that it's going to make it through this winter. Our mechanic has recommended that we replace it as quickly as possible. It didn't show up any deficiencies in its MDOT inspection, so it is safe to go on the road. But maintenance-wise, it's starting to nickel and dime us, and it could be bigger items down the road. And I don't see us putting money into a truck of this age for its use. We did use My Deal contracts for these. These trucks were built identical to what we have in the rest of the fleet. We like consistency for the mechanic, so he can have the same software, same parts, everything on hand to work on all the international trucks across the board. The same body style, same scraper blades, everything. Like I said, we used My Deal contracts on both the truck body from Knapheide Equipment and the chassis from Tri-County International Trucks. I can field any questions. This is a 2019 purchase. This is not a 2018 purchase. The reason I'm bringing it to the board now is so that we can get this stuff ordered. A big reason is because you might have heard the steel tariff prices are going to skyrocket in January as much as 30%. And the dealer for the body did tell me that that would increase his quote if we didn't order now. We can lock in the prices now.
Mr. Massey?
One question. We had a discussion with you when we discussed the budget, that you would probably look into an extended warranty.
Correct.
Will you consider that for this vehicle?
So we did talk about extended warranties after that meeting with the Chevrolet dealer for the small pickup trucks, and he generally didn't recommend it. He said it's for municipalities, it's usually better to self-insure, which is what we typically do anyhow. And for this truck, they don't offer an extended warranty of that nature for municipal use.
Mr. Guzek?
So I know it's gonna be billed in 2019 budget. We have to put a deposit, half down or anything?
There will be no cost until we receive the truck in 2019.
So do you know what month you'll receive it?
We're thinking end of January, early February.
All right, January, okay.
Mr. Atkins?
And the current truck, you said, is what, '04?
I believe it's an '03.
'03, so you would expect to get a decade out of this one?
It's on a 15-year replacement plan. All of our larger trucks are on 15-year replacement plans.
And what happens with the old, is it surplused out or
It'll be
sold?
surplused and sold on Gov Deals.
Okay.
You got an estimate of how much that is yet?
You know what? We haven't sold one in a few years. I think we've got $15,000 to $20,000 for the last one that we sold.
Oh, wow.
It was probably in a little bit better condition than this one is, though. There's actually not that big of a market for municipal plow trucks, and they're kind of specialized vehicles, so.
Might be able to sell it to Genesee County or Flint.
You know, Mr. Sears, I think, you know, one of the things that we annually have is kind of debate on whether or not we should be plowing roads, so.
Right, we
I don't
do.
know if we want to get into that tonight, but,
It'll be
I
on a
just
forthcoming
if we
agenda.
spend $250,000 now.
Right.
so, but I do want to state that, for the record, that snow plowing is not the responsibility of the township, and it is the responsibility of the county. However, our residents have come to rely on us to plow the streets in a timely manner, and we have a policy that over 4 inches, 4 inches or over, we plow, and our residents appreciate that. I think if we were to if we were to cut that out now, we would probably see quite a few upset residents
You would.
coming to this board.
And I want you to think that this is just for snow and ice. This is used for the water and sewer department also. So,
Okay.
I mean, we use them quite a bit during the summer and winter for various excavations. So it's
Well-
not just for snow and ice. They just happen to be set up for snow and ice. The water and sewer fund pays for them, and the general fund does pay us back for the use of the trucks.
Well, and we have quite a few major projects starting next spring as well for water and sewer projects, right?
We do, yeah.
Mr. Mansour?
I was just gonna ask, someone ask about the budgeting of this? Is this in your capital budget for
It
next year?
is. It's in 2019's
19,
budget.
yep.
Yeah, we're just approving it ahead of time so I can get it worked.
Thank you.
And hopefully no snowstorms till,
It's gonna snow tonight, but not enough for me to be worried about it.
I got a boat in the
Okay.
water still.
I'll make the motion.
I'll support.
okay, there's been a motion supported. Any further discussion?
No one will,
All those in favor say aye.
aye.
Any opposed?
See, no one will support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item E, the board will consider a motion to approve the clerk's request of an additional stipend for election workers. Ms. Lane?
Well, I'm back. It was a busy election, and I showed you some of the detail, and we were busy, so I would appreciate your support of the election workers.
So, Ms. Lane, my only question is that, I know we touched on it earlier, was with regard to the clerk's office, your budget for, I know that we've had a few expenses with the new equipment, I guess, maybe, was that this year, or was that in last budget year? I can't remember.
The state, we paid for, part of it, and we paid for the $21,000 extra. But we had the major computer that was supplied by the state many years ago. That broke down,
Okay.
and we needed some new chairs because they kept going down during the day and didn't stay up.
Right.
So, and then we've had training for the workers because of the new equipment. So I'm sure that,
Well, I know Mr. Mansour usually asks the question, and he didn't ask it this evening.
well,
Do you know what question I'm referring to, Mr.
Geez,
Mr. Mansour?
No, please.
He's been at the pavilion.
I've been to the pavilion. No, what?
Are we over budget in any particular department, or how are our revenues coming in?
I actually was going to ask that, but I forgot in the consent agenda, because we were at about 68% of we were about 68% of our revenue and about 75% of our expense. So I am
In the clerk's
monitoring that.
budget, or is
Huh?
that, that's the overall budget?
Overall budget, that's exactly right.
Okay.
I didn't
Well,
get down to the line item, so, sorry.
Well,
I won't disappoint you next time.
Okay.
right. Superintendent Lima did indicate to me that last year when the treasurer's budget went over, I very willingly gave my extra monies to him so that he balanced. So I'm hoping that there's some department that has some extra, because this is the first thing that a township has to do, before even having a police department.
Right,
So-
but we've got also, I think, one of the things that, well, we like our police too, so we want elections and police, but I just want to stay on this one topic for just a minute in terms, and I know we have Mr. Thomas and Mr. Massey with their hands up.
Could you?
But my question was, that I started out, they asked, that Mr. Mansour didn't ask, was, in terms of our budget for clerk's department, Mr. Limita, I know that's sent out to all of our board members, but
We're way over.
before we ask for a bonus, where are we at with the clerk's department and the budget currently?
So I
Because
can-
we're gonna have to make an amendment and ask Mr. Guzak to give up money or somebody else, and I don't know.
So you will be looking at some amendments at your next meeting for the fiscal year 2018. At this point, it's hard for me to say if the clerk's department or the elections cost center will be there. We were at 62%, but that left her $30,000 for election expenses for, this was at the end of October 31st. Now, there's obviously been quite a bit, and I don't know where that payroll is going to come in. We ran back and looked at 2016 November, which was a presidential election, and looked at the just the election workers expense at 17.5. I don't know that it included FICA and everything else, but she's got $30,000 left in that elections expense, so I would assume that it will cover it. They are being paid slightly more, like $50 more than they were at that time. If you guys are gonna put another stipend in there, there's a potential that it could be slightly higher. But it looks to me now, and then based upon contingent workers' wages, if you look at the line item, she was way over, but her overall cost center for the township clerk's office is showing about just under $48,000. So not knowing what her payroll looks like since October 31st, hard for me to judge until we run that election payroll. So I think it's close. I think she's probably gonna be okay for 2018, but it will be close.
And I did get the 23,000. I know it doesn't show in the expenditure side, but we did get this quarter the money from the schools for the township's cost for the school special election in May. So that was roughly another 23,000. I mean, I'm admitting it's gonna be tight, but I'm very proud to say we had a 62% voter turnout for this election. That's over 18,000 people that voted in this election, and I am very, very happy that the voters participated.
Mr. Massey, you've had your hand up.
Yes, I have two questions. My first question, up until today, how much money has we spent on this election? Seemed like this election took hold early in October. So how much money we have spent so far on this election?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Well, before I approve anything tonight, I would like to know where we are. Because you've already cut the check for the
No.
work that you've done.
We have not cut any, we are holding off turning in any money for our election workers until this board makes a decision tonight, because we don't want to add the additional staff time to run 2 payrolls. So everybody is on hold.
Yeah, my concern was where were we at, and if Mr. Molina says that we're within range, Mr. Massey, I understand your concern, but I guess Mr. Limita is telling us that we're within the range. I guess I'm okay.
One of the things that happened too is, if you look under their retiree insurance, we did have a retiree pass away, unfortunately, but that did leave additional funds within that line item. It's a considerable amount, so I think that's why we ended up with the $48,000 for the overall clerk's budget. So like I said, depending on how her payroll comes in, I know they were here till 3 in the morning or whatever. It's including the contingent employees' wages and we also had the deputies' wages were booked at as if it was full-time, and yet we had her initial deputy wasn't working full-time. She was only working 30 hours a week, so we had some savings in salaries and wages there until the deputy changed over.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, and then Mr. Atkins.
2 questions. First off, I'd like to have the motion reread with an actual dollar amount that we're talking about. And, $50, the motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
The board will consider a motion to approve the clerk's request of additional stipend for election workers.
That was,
Pretty sure there should be a dollar amount in there.
the stipend was $25 for election inspectors.
Pretty sure there should be a dollar amount
And
in that
$50
motion.
for chair
So
people.
both
And
dollar
then,
amounts should be.
my other question is to Superintendent Limita. You said FICA? We don't take FICA out of the election workers, do we?
Yeah, there's actually is in the election workers' pay. We have, like for what we had booked for through 10/31 was, yeah, $23,370 left with $3,300 left. But yeah, we do withdraw FICA wages for some of the election workers.
For some.
For some.
Mr. Chair, let me ask you a
Yes.
question here.
Mr. Mance.
Trustee Thomas brought up an interesting point. Dollar amount, what are we saying? How much are we paying the workers? May I say, per person?
The regular pay that you approved was $175 and $200 for the chairs and co-chairs. And I'm asking for an additional $25 for the election workers and $50 for the chairs.
Yeah, but what
Because
do you mean additional?
It's the
25.
same as every election.
Oh,
Mr.
you mean, and if I work, let me give you an example, so I can understand this. If I worked as a chairperson in the election, so I get another $50.
Right.
25.
50.
No, 50 it is. 25 for election inspectors and
50
25 for the
people.
chair people, because they have to come back in here after the polls closed. And in case of one of our election precincts, we had 70 people in line at 8 o'clock, and they couldn't close their books down until those 70 people had been through and voted their ballot. So
Okay.
then they have to come in here and fulfill all the other paperwork that we do here.
Okay, 175,
I think we need to take a look too. We've looked at this probably, we've had 4 votes on increasing election worker pay over the last, 2 years?
6 months.
Right, but this,
So I think,
2 months, Lonnie.
Well-
Lonnie's not just months.
Every meeting.
I think one of the things that, I think we need to have we already have an elections commission. And I would ask them to take a look at how we compare with bonus, non-bonus, whatever. Mr. Thomas, if you guys could take a look at this and just see how we compare with other municipalities. I'll get to you, Mr. Guzak, in just a moment. But see how we compare to other municipalities, but also look at the overall cost of what it cost us to run an election, a few years ago versus today, because our population hasn't changed that much. We're also going to need to take a look at what the budget, we talked earlier in the meeting, we realize there's some constitutional changes here in the state that are going to affect our elections. We need to look at projecting out what that's going to cost. So I think you guys have a little bit of work to do for us to consider. But I think I'd like to take a kind of and if there's some way of summarizing that information on a one sheet showing where we've been, comparing it, historically, and just so as we move forward, we know where we're going. Mr. Atkins, you had your hand up, or no, Mr. Guzak? Mr. Guzak.
yeah, the question I had is, I know last time we did the stipend, these are the same amounts that we did last time, correct?
Correct.
Right, okay, so
Yeah.
then I'm okay with it then.
Mr. Atkins?
I hate to say it, but I'm just so confused over this thing because, I mean, I know where we are, but we've talked this thing to death for 2 months.
Because you're at the pavilion.
Why, what's the rationale to give more money right now? Just because longer hours, longer lines, what's the rationale? I mean, they knew what they got into signing up for these roles, correct? The population hasn't changed, but I do understand that the elections will be more complex and more people will get out to vote now. Things have changed. But in terms of the expectation of the workers versus, you know, we're just constantly trying to nickel and dime more here and there. I don't understand what the driving force is. Is it just more hours, or
Is there gonna be a time?
harder to
when
get
we-
workers, or what is it?
Are we gonna have an election where we don't give a bonus, is what I'm wondering. I mean, because will
I
we have
tried-
an election where
I-
we won't?
I don't know. There is nobody in the state of Michigan, nobody in the county that anticipated what happened for the turnout in AV voters and voters at the polls with this election.
Well, we gave them the same amount in May, though.
Yeah.
But they
Which
were,
was-
they
No,
were,
that was, what happened in May was, I made a proposal and Mr. Massey said, let's go with an hourly rate. So when we did the hourly rate in May,
Well, I'm talking about the August.
no.
In August, they got a bonus.
they got the
That's
same
right.
bonus we're saying right now, right?
Right.
But Mr. Thomas is saying they worked even extra this time, and we're giving them the same bonus that they
Yeah,
got
we're not
in-
giving
in
any
August.
in
extra.
August.
Right.
So, and then what I'm wondering is, is there ever an election where we don't give the bonus? Because
what are
otherwise,
you
we just
gonna
make it
do?
part of the pay.
well, that's what
And-
I tried
But then
to
we're
do,
gonna be
but
looking at a bonus on top of that. I
It's
don't know.
gotta
Totally
keep
agree
going
with
up.
you.
I don't
Totally agree with you.
So
sir.
anyways, what I'd like
Mr.
to
Bennett.
do is to have the election commission look at this for the future in terms of all those things we talked about. But we gotta make a decision whether tonight, we want to go forward, and I guess, you know, since our election workers probably are planning on this, since it's been on the agenda, I guess
Yeah, I'll
we
make the
probably have to
motion.
move forward on
Yeah,
this
I'll
one.
make the motion that we do the same stipend that we did last time, which was what, $50 for the elected chairs?
and
And
25 for the
25 for
election.
the election workers.
I
Right.
disagree.
What would you like
First,
to
we
see,
gotta
Mr.
wait for a
Massey?
second.
I make a motion based on what Clerk Lane said. 175
No, no,
plus the $25, 200 plus the $50.
That's what
So that's
he
what
was saying the
Mr.
same
That's what
thing.
Mr. Guzak's saying.
that's what I said, because this.
No,
this
I heard what he said, but I don't want to get into that discussion. I'd like for it to say exactly what I just said.
That the workers, the election workers that are getting paid 175,
Plus the 25.
and the chairs and co-chairs that are making 200, that they get $50.
Yes.
I'll support that, but I have a comment.
Okay, Mr. Guzak, will you,
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, they're getting the same amount of money. This document here said we're just giving them the
Stipend.
extra amounts.
Right.
So I knew the 175 would be there and the 200.
Okay.
If you want the clarification, I'm fine
Okay.
with that.
Yeah.
Mr. Atkins?
You know, there's no doubt elections are very important, and we need to support that and make sure that the job gets done right. But the only thing you know, this is a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, and we've talked about it a lot. The only thing I want is just, you know, going forward, can we just say, this is what it's going to be? Because I just fear that down the road, you know, each year will be another bonus, then another structure here, another bonus there, then before you know it, we'll be the highest paid election workers in the state of Michigan.
Already are.
So let's just say, hey, this is what it's going to be, and until you run into a time where you can't find people to do the job, then maybe we need to talk about it again. But
Mr. Atkins, I can tell you for this election, we used every single person that had been trained and was willing to work. We did not have an extra person because of a family emergency. 3 people left over in West Middle School. I can give you the stories.
I don't think Mr. Atkins is questioning that. He's just saying that in the future, you know, we need to know where we're at, and that this doesn't, every time, you know, because I would rather than having to go for a bonus, we just tell people, here's what the wage is. We don't know whether you're gonna be out of there at 8:30, or you're gonna be out of there at 3:30, but here's what the money is, and and we don't have to go through this every election. But Mr. Thomas, you had your hand up?
The election committee, which is made up of trustee Massey, myself, and Clerk Lane, will meet, and we will get something about the history now and the future, our best guesstimates, and
Okay.
do it before the first of the year.
Yes, that'd be great.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yep, well, but it'll help us with our well,
Yep.
we need to get it into the budget, so
Oh,
work with
I guess
Mr.
we'll
Lee
do it
on
next
the
time.
timeline for that.
scheduled for next year.
Right, but I mean, we need to get it in the budget if we're looking at,
I guess we'll meet next week.
well, I'm saying the estimate for the new counting board and the new equipment, and what
Yes.
have you. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I'm kinda confused, cause I thought we already approved that last time when she got the stipend, we said, yep, you can have the 175 and the 200, and then if you need to do the stipend, you're gonna get 25 and 50, but you have to come back to the board just to say that you're gonna do it. So I thought it was already set, that's all we wanted to do, and all she was doing was coming back and say, we ran it to 3 o'clock.
I'll
so
second trustee Massey's motion.
It's already
and I'll
been
call-
seconded.
Then I'll call for the vote.
I already beat you to it.
You already
All
called
those
for the
in
vote?
favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
You called for the vote?
No, I seconded
Called for the question, excuse me.
the motion.
I called for
All right, so we will move on to future agenda items, and
it. You gotta call.
I know that a couple of things. One is, I did hand out to everybody, I had a few of you call me and ask for the policy that we have for credit card expenditure, as well as the purchasing policy, because they both kind of go hand in hand. And I don't know if any of you had questions on them, but the issue came up because of an issue with credit card usage, and that was reported to the board in terms of Ms. Lane had inadvertently used a credit card, but anyways, the policy is there. I think we want to let Mr. Limita and Ms. Sostak look at the policies and make some suggested changes. They've been in place for quite a while, but I think there's some holes in them that we can have them make some suggestions. But if you have any suggestions to bring forward, feel free to do that. But I think we're looking at in December, probably having these changes ready for the board to consider. Mr. Atkins?
To Superintendent Limita, how many credit cards are issued right now?
I don't know the number, but it's basically department heads and
Supervisor, clerk,
supervisor,
treasurer?
myself. There's, obviously the police chief, Captain Bowserman also has one. But we want to rewrite the policy and tighten it up a little bit, because there are some things have changed since the policy came through. Home Depot cards for DPW. There's Sam's Club that we use for supplies. So I want to make sure that those are all kind of listed and logged, who holds those and how that works. I think there's a little bit of the policy that we can tighten up on who's got it and what the responsibility lies with it. I want to include not just the overall, like the MasterCard, but all of those, Home Depot and.
Do certain cards have certain limits?
Yeah. I have a $5,000 limit. Department heads have $2,500 limits. I think the supervisor also has a $5,000 limit on his.
Okay, thanks.
What, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
one thing I'd like to see added to the policy, not the exact wording, but think about it, is that when someone misuses a credit card based on X number of times, that discussion should be brought before the board, and we should have a discussion about it. Let the public know that one of our department heads, a supervisor, has misused his or her credit card. We owe that to the public. And we take action, whatever action is necessary.
Right now, our policy states that if there's a misuse by anyone, that our finance department notifies Mr. Limita. Mr. Limita notifies me, and then I notify our board. I'm not sure there's anything right now in the policy that would state that has to be brought up at the board meeting, is there, Mr. Limita, or?
Nope, just that it's notified. Like I said, the finance director, as soon as she's flagged, is required to notify me immediately, and I'm required to notify you immediately.
What Mr. Massey's suggesting is that if there is misuse by a number of times, that the card be relinquished.
I mean, in violation of the policy now, from the credit card policy, and again, we're required by law to have a credit card policy, and then we also talk to it in the purchasing policy because there's some other variations on it. But the law requires us to have this policy, and this one says it could result in disciplinary action up to and including the possibility of immediate termination.
With an elected official, it's gonna be tough to do that, though, I think.
You can't do it with elected officials, it's just, it's different rules. I mean, the board could, I don't know where you would go with it, other than to remove the card.
Well,
The
let's,
ability to help have a card.
Superintendent, that's why I'm saying if we could add to the policy that a discussion of he or she would be brought to the board. Let the public know who has misused the credit card.
Something that could be considered. I don't know, Mr. Limita, you'll consider that when you and Ms. Sostak make recommendations?
Yeah, we'll highlight what we have in there now, and then we can look to see if there's other recommendations. I can also jump online and look at other municipalities and see if there's any recommendations from a finance perspective about sanctions or actions in regards to repeated misuse.
And if any other board members, Mr. Massey, have other suggestions too, ask that you forward them to Mr. Limita and myself, and that goes for any board member if you have any suggestions on that policy. Yes, Mr. Atkins?
Even large companies like my company, you know, their policy is the least amount of credit cards issued is the best policy. And, you know, they constantly review who has them, and, you know, there's a lot of positions that, you know, sometimes you don't need something that urgently in every department, that you can't wait for a manual check run or whatever. But, yeah, I'd just be interested to see, you know, Superintendent Limita has his recommendation. Are the cards that are issued now, are they absolutely critical that the people that have them keep them? Or maybe review how many are out there, and non-essential and essential people that use them daily. Or I guess if you don't use your credit card but once a month or something, then maybe that's a good indicator that you might not, that you could probably wait for a check run or something. But
And right now, our policy states that we want you to use your credit card for township business. If you're making a township purchase, to use your township credit card rather than your personal one and have reimbursements or whatever. That's the way the policy reads, and I wasn't here when they wrote it in 2013, so I can't comment on what the specific motivation was behind that.
Has there been any issues with misuse amongst staff, department heads, or anything? I mean, that follows the same process too, right? I mean,
Not in the time I've been here.
But I mean, we would be notified,
Correct.
or you would be notified.
If anyone is,
So the same policy that applies to board applies to our staff and department
Correct.
heads. So, and we haven't had any notifications that there's been any staff issues with credit cards, so.
How many times
Mr. Thomas?
so our staff's fine, it's just what happened recently?
I think,
Okay, that's
yeah,
fine. That's
so
fine.
we'll take a look
That's
at,
fine.
well, and Mr. Lehman and I and Ms. Sostak have been talking about the policy because we do want to make sure that, if we've got practices that we're doing, we want to make sure that we don't have a gotcha kind of thing, because we've been operating outside the policy, just as, you know, for example, Mr. Lehman mentioned, we've got Home Depot cards. Well, you know, does that fall within our policy? I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean, we need to write the policy to fit our practice a little bit too, if the board would agree. So I think we'll move forward on that, and we'll take any suggestions to Mr. Limita, and he'll be coming back to us with a proposed policy. Just a couple other things on task force. I don't know, we're gonna have an investment task force tomorrow to take a look. I think, you know, Mr. Guzak has a huge responsibility with, you know, everything we charge him with investing $25 million bucks, and I know it's a huge boulder for him to have on his shoulders, so I don't know. Our policy, you know, I know we have a policy in place, and that's how we dictate to Mr. Guzak or any treasurer how we invest that money. And I'm not sure that the policy has to be changed, but I think, you know, a few board members have said, hey, is there anything we can do to help with that? But, so we'll take a look at that tomorrow morning. I'm wondering if anybody would have time on Monday evening for a Parks and Rec, just a work session with their board.
Just the board?
A board to discuss, you know, go through some of the study that Mr. Atkins put together, you know, with the value stream mapping.
5 o'clock?
Well, I don't know, you know, I'd like to get all the board members there if we can,
Or
if you're available.
but it'll be
A work
board
session.
task, not a
A
task.
board
A
work
whole
session
board.
where we sit around and Mr.
Awesome.
Atkins can go through the value stream mapping and we can talk about some of the things we had outlined with Ms. Radwin.
Okay.
What's that? I don't know, would Mr. Mansour, are you available Monday evening?
I'm actually out of the country.
Are you? Okay.
I'm available.
Mr. Guzak, would you be available?
I'm not sure, I'll have to check.
Okay. Well, everyone take a look at your calendars and see if you, I'll send out an email and we'll see what day this next week would work. I'd like to figure out a date that will work, where we can get all of our board members together. I think it's critical that we talk through some of these things. Anything with board reports? Yes, I'm sorry.
What about the following week, the week of the 19th?
That's
That's
Thanksgiving
Thanksgiving
week.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's what I'd like to get in next week. if we
oh,
can.
okay.
Mr. Mansour, anything on planning, zoning?
Yeah, I guess there's just a couple of things, so sorry to extend the meeting here for a second, but with regard to the Metro Alliance, and Clerk Lane has already distributed this, but there's a call for projects for the 2020-2023 Transportation Improvement Program. They're due on November 16th at 5 p.m., so we know about those, so that's an opportunity for us to get our oar in the water there.
Mr. Sears or Mr. Limita, you want to bring up? I actually go to a meeting once a month that we cover that issue, and I had brought that back to Mr. Sears and Mr. Limita, but go ahead.
Yeah, we are aware of the call for projects, and we are working with the road commission, because they're our Act 51 agency, the road commission is, they have to submit all the projects. Next year specifically, we have Hill Road being rebuilt, and more than likely Dort Highway is going to start construction. So the rest of our primary road system is in very good shape. TIP grants are only allowed for federally funded roads. The only other federally funded road we have is Cook Road. It's kind of an anomaly. It's a weird federally funded local road. There's not very many of them in Genesee County, but we have talked to the road commission. They're going to put an application in on our behalf for Cook Road also. They're going to do 3 different applications for the 3 different lane miles. More than likely, they thought that there was a good chance one of them would get approved, at least in this round of funding, and then you could go incrementally in the next few years. It does require a 20% match from the township, but they've said that we can use our allocation funds from year to year also for those matching funds. So we are going to do that. Otherwise, for TIP funding, our primary road system in the township is actually in really good condition, so they probably wouldn't qualify. But Hill Road's the last one that's getting redone next year. It's going to be a nightmare, but we'll get through it. So.
Okay, thanks. So then just, that was it for the Metro Alliance meeting. For the Planning Commission, so just real quickly there, we spending more time on the master plan. Director Lloyd went through the RFP with us. We talked a little bit amongst ourselves and wanted to highlight that the visioning portion of it at the very beginning is where we're going to really try and build public interest in the master plan, because we want to get people pulled into that. We want to engage with owners of businesses in the areas to get their understanding of what it takes to really grow them. circling back to the RFP, Director Lloyd's going to have a criteria matrix on how to evaluate the RFPs. And so when they come back on November 14th, we'll be able to do that in a kind of a logical, objective way. And then the last thing is that in the master plan, we talked about, we have a huge township here, but there are some specific areas that we want to focus on in terms of corridors. So right now, the ones that we're looking at is the kind of the Trillium one along Holly Road, the Dort Highway Extension, Tech Village, and the DDA. So those are going to be our primary focuses in terms of, really trying to dig into those and make the master plan work for those areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mansour. Mr. Thomas, anything Parks and Rec?
I'll wait until our work session with the board.
Okay. Mr. Massey on fire?
No.
Okay. Mr. Atkins, anything on zoning board of appeals?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Mr. Guzak?
Oh, no, nothing except, the bond has been all set up for Concord Green, so luckily that's all been accomplished and taken care of and funded, so that's, glad that that's underway. So.
Very good. Clerk Lane?
Everybody heard, I'm very pleased that we had a 62% turnout for a midterm.
I have a question.
Yes.
Clerk Lane, you sent us an email, the whole board, talking about, the lines, the length of time, and you talked about having to do something with precinct 10 and precinct 15, some kind of a combination. I know it's, again, kind of late here, but can you describe what your email was proposing? Because hearing from the community, and in my precinct 10, we had enormous long lines. And so, and it's been there ever since I think I've lived here. And so there was a lot of discussion about looking around at precinct 8, which there was nobody, about something needing to be done to change our distribution. So I brought this up before, but given that you brought it up in an email, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you're doing there.
Well, each precinct no precinct can exceed 2,999 voters. And when we established the precincts back in 2010, we did it based on where we thought the projections would be. And so that's why the southern end has really grown more frequently. And none of us in those two particular precincts you're talking about have exceeded. And in the next few years, when we do the 2020, we'll be doing it again. And I just wanted to give you some information so you knew that we follow certain laws from the state that are mandated, and why we have certain precincts that look kind of weird, and why I choose major streets and things like that, so that you know there's a thought process. It's not just thrown out there.
But there's no thought to kind of consolidate 10 and 15.
If we were to consolidate anything, we'd have to, and draw new lines, we would have to send out all new cards and get approval from the state to do it.
Okay.
But there probably will be some changes in the near future.
I hope so.
The 2020 with that, but
Right.
I experienced the same thing and brought it to Ms. Lane's attention where 6 and 15 vote.
Okay.
That there is quite a disparity between the two in terms of the line. And we actually had a few people through social media contact us that stated that, they thought they were ending up in the wrong precinct based on what the map shows. And Ms. Lane did some checking today, and turns out that there is some kind of inconsistency there with the state. So we're going to, she's tracking that down to figure out what's going on with that, to get some people realigned. But
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Limata? Anything that?
Sure, a couple things. The fire department cost allocation study, we got the revised draft. I got the initial draft, sat down with them again. We got the revised draft based on some questions that I had. I just got that, so we're going through that to take a look at it, but it looks like we're getting close to wrapping it up. I talked with one of the representatives. He was very pleased with the cooperation from the city manager and the city of Grand Blanc. It looks like the information's coming together. I don't want to give it any dollar amounts here quite yet till we know, since it is in draft form, till we get it solidified up. But I can tell you that we were underreporting the cost considerably once we looked at all the cost allocation of the various departments. So I think it's going to be a good eye opener for all of us when we get that final report.
When do you anticipate that, Dennis? Or Ms. Lehman?
I think it's probably, unfortunately, one of the gentlemen was going in for some surgery, and so it's going to switch to another guy who's going to be finishing up the report. The one that I've been working with most closely, he's got to be out for some surgery, so that may delay us, but we'll have it, into by the end of November, beginning of December, I believe that we'll start to see it and have him in for the presentation. I'm hoping for that first meeting in December.
Because we're gonna have to make some decisions in December, right?
We are, and you're going to hear at the next meeting a presentation from Chief Burdette in regards to his proposed budget. Of course, we've got to wrap up his budget before the end of the year, so he's going to propose based on where he believes his expenses are now. We're obviously going to have to do some amendments as we come together and work out how we're moving forward. But in order to stay compliant with law, he's got to do his presentation. So he'll do that based upon the information that he has now. And we waited, he was going to bring it sooner, but we asked him to hold off because we wanted to see, of course, the city had a question mark on the ballot for what they were doing. But as we move into this cost allocation, we're not going to be based on revenue. It's not going to say you guys are paying 1.25 and they pay 1.25 or whatever. It's cost, and what is the cost, and then you're just going to have to pay accordingly. And I think that cost allocation study is going to be good for all of us because then we can make some fact-based decisions. And I think the board's really going to appreciate when they see it.
So what you're saying is the cost, the
Cost
true
is
cost of the city having a fire department, the true cost of the township having a fire
Absolutely. And
department.
if we buy a truck, we'll have to allocate those costs accordingly. If we buy 2 trucks, we'll allocate those costs accordingly. And so
And
what
just
we
the-
pay on any given year isn't going to be based on arbitrary,
we
like a
collect.
millage. It's going to be based on whatever the cost is, and we're going to have to share that cost per the cost allocation study, and you pay for what you should be paying for. So it's good. I think it's going to be good for all of us. It removes some of the question marks and some of the challenges that you have when you're doing a joint operation.
Right.
Okay.
It also provided valuable information from the building and DPW, and we have to keep those enterprise funds separate and how much we charge rent back or whatever. So all that information had to be uncovered to come up with this. So it's just going to be a wealth of information that is so helpful during the budgeting process. I'm really looking forward to rolling it out in 2019. We've got the meeting starting next week for retiree healthcare, the plus 65s on that conversion to the Hartford. I'm happy to let the board know that the questions that we've gotten so far from our retirees have been very supportive. Most of them call and don't really have any anxiety over it. They're looking forward to it. They understand that it's actually an enhanced benefit that saves the township a considerable amount of funds. So we're looking forward to those meetings next week. We've got 4 meetings scheduled next week to meet individually with all the retirees. McFarland Library, I met Win Cooper and Kevin Johnson out there this week. They did an assessment of the building so that we can really put together that 5-year capital plan. So instead of them popping up, hey, we need carpeting, hey, the roof leaks, hey, we got HVAC, we're going to be able to roll it out. Preliminarily, I think just looking at some of that stuff, if you really want to put it together for the next 25 years to guarantee that you've put it back in shape, it probably is more like a 5 to 7 year plan, and we're probably looking at it could be as much as $500,000 to $700,000 to really do all the things that are going to need to be done in that building for long term. So I'm just kind of planting that seed right now. When we get the information, we'll send it to the library board, but you guys will see it first. I have reached out to the city on that as well, and they're fully on board and interested in moving that forward. Lastly, it's the holiday tree lighting. We did a call out for support for folks who may want to participate in that through sponsorships. Last count, I think we were somewhere around $3,500 in sponsorships pledged to assist us with that. We've got Santa Claus is scheduled. We've got horse-drawn carriages ready to go. Some lights are on order. We've got a plan together. We met earlier today. We're real excited to see this thing come together. The middle school and high school choirs will be there performing Christmas carols.
About the Grinch.
I do believe that I have heard that the Grinch will be in attendance trying to steal our holiday or Christmas spirit, and I've already alerted Chief Wiles, and he assures me that the situation will be firmly in hand on November 30th between 5 and 7 p.m. out at Bicentennial Park. thank you to Parks and Recreation for all their help in putting this together. Kate and Sonia have been a huge help, as well as the maintenance guys out there who have provided us a great deal of support. But it's Chief Burdette, Chief Wiles, Jeff Sears, Kay. Megan is working her tail off. She's a little stressed out, but the loose ends are coming together. We're really looking forward to it. We think it's going to be an awesome community event.
Well, you had thought maybe a couple hundred, and I heard that I should quit telling you what I think there'll be, because I heard that you were
Right
getting
now on
stressed.
Facebook, it's like 2.2K.
I think it could be
I'm
quite
a little
crowd.
concerned. We were thinking 200, not 2,000. But I think we're going to have a good turnout. It's probably weather contingent. We've been working really hard on parking and lighting, and I think we'll be fine, but it may be a bit bigger crowd than we had initially anticipated.
Just one last item, we did have an informational meeting for our DDA members to kind of spell out what some of the plans might look like. We brought in the gentleman, the consultant from Rowe Engineering that we're going to use for helping us put together the plan, kind of walk through what we're going to need to do, the officers that we're going to need to elect, and we'll have our first official meeting later this month where we will actually have the DDA members elect their officers, so and we'll adopt the bylaws, what have you. So the meeting we had was just kind of an unofficial discussion on the issues that will need to be decided. So we'll have our official meeting later this month. So anyways, with that,
I make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Real quick, David, David texted me, he's doing great, he's home, and small complication, and he's enjoying his pain pills, and he'll see us next week.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thanks, everyone.